Good afternoon, everybody. This meeting of the Community Affairs and Planning Committee is being held virtually. This meeting is also being live streamed and may be viewed online at ajax.ca/live. Friendly reminder to all participants to please activate your microphone only when recognized by the chair. To those making submissions as part of a public meeting or during question period, please ensure you clearly state your name. If you decide you no longer wish to speak on an item on the agenda, please leave the virtual meeting and continue watching the live stream on YouTube should you wish to do so. I'll now call this meeting to order. We'd like to begin this meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is situated within the traditional and treaty territories of the Mississaugas. More specifically, the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, signatories of the Gunshot Treaty of 1788 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. This land is, and will continue to be, home to the Indigenous peoples. Let us acknowledge the mistakes and traumas of the past through authenticity and support truth and reconciliation. Let us engage and celebrate Indigenous communities by being leaders of action and acknowledging the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations towards truth and reconciliation. Let us keep these principles close as we continue towards truth and reconciliation and as we move forward with kindness and respect as a community. Any members of council have any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, can I get a mover for the adoption of minutes for May 4th, 2026? I see Councillor Bauer. Any questions, comments, concerns on that? Seeing none, we'll start the vote on the minutes. Apologies, we needed a seconder. I got this confused with GGC. Councillor Tyler Moore, you were the seconder for the minutes. Is that okay? Give me a nod. Seeing that, perfect. Okay, folks, we have a pretty fast meeting. We're going to get through this very quickly. We're first going to start with a public meeting for PDS 2026-17, zoning our future comprehensive zoning bylaw review, phase 2, final amendment. Clerk, do we have any public delegations? We do. Okay, the first one, please. Okay, the first one is, thank you, Tamika Marcus, Ajax resident. Tamika, if you could just hit your select to speak, we can go from there. And you have 5 minutes.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My attendance is to formally request that staff and/or supporting consultants be directed to complete a social impact assessment as part of planning and include the findings in a report along with the 8 other technical reports completed as part of the final zoning document. The report should have a strong focus on the downtown area, as we are currently seeing the limits of existing zoning in the Commercial Avenue area, as well as use of temporary bylaw amendments to support things such as crisis care. Staff have produced 8 excellent technical reports for this review covering parking, trees, strong neighborhoods, yet there is no report evaluating the social or people-related impacts social services, as well as other services, have on the area, as well as potential impacts as a result of new requests that we know will be recommended, especially as a result of the region's urban center social services methodology and the town's findings as it relates to winter warming and the recommendations to find alternative locations for the upcoming winter. Similar to how it is prudent to complete a traffic or environmental report as part of a new subdivision, updating the downtown central area zoning without a social impact assessment would result in gaps and blind spots, potentially codifying land usage that has already been admittedly problematic for the area's stability and growth. So this afternoon, I'm looking for your support for the completion of this report and inclusion as part of final plans. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that delegation. Members of the committee, anybody have any questions for the resident? I see Councillor Bauer. Councillor Bauer.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Ms. Mercurius. Nice to see you, and thank you for taking the time to come out and delegate to us for this very important matter. I guess my question, I'm sorry, Chair, is not so much for the delegate, but for staff. if they could speak to this social impact assessment report that Ms. Mercurius has talked about, and sort of tell us what would be involved in completing something like that, please.
Councillor Bauer, there's going to be a presentation and then a report afterwards. If we don't mind saving that specific question for the report, we can just ask questions to the delegate now, please.
Okay, thank you. No, I have no further questions. I'm happy that Tamika has brought this forward, and I will be following up with staff at the appropriate time for that assessment report. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Tamika, for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Our next delegate, we have Joshua Butcher, Senior Director of Development on behalf of First Capital Canada, or First Capital Corporation. Joshua, are you there? Yes, you are, and you have 5 minutes.
Perfect. You can hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name's Joshua Butcher. I'm a Senior Director of Development at First Capital REIT, which is the owner of Harwood Plaza at 280 to 350 Harwood Avenue and 33 Hunt Street, which is held by our subsidiary First Capital Ajax Corporation. As you may recall, I appeared before this committee back in November of 2025 and spoke to our official plan amendment and rezoning application to establish permissions to allow for a comprehensive redevelopment of the north end of the property with 3 buildings at 16, 23, and 30 stories. The application was approved by council and resulted in site-specific exception 231 without any holding provisions. However, it's recently come to our attention that the draft comprehensive zoning bylaw review before the committee today contemplates the addition of a holding provision due to the site's proximity to 170 Mill Road, the Index Energy facility, and that to remove the holding provision, we must 1, submit an air quality study, and 2, enter into a site plan agreement that requires the implementation of any of the required mitigation measures identified in that air quality study. Our request today is a simple one, that our lands be excluded from this holding provision because part of the review of our official plan amendment and rezoning application, we included a compatibility and mitigation study prepared by SLR, which included an assessment, an air quality assessment, as well as noise and vibration, and it was peer reviewed for the town. The study concluded that the site is anticipated to be compatible with surrounding land uses with the inclusion of appropriate mitigation measures and use of warning clauses, namely the provision of air conditioning to allow windows to remain closed as needed, and the positioning of air intake strategically. These are all pretty typical conditions across Ontario for residential development sites located near industry. And we submit that a holding provision is not necessarily required to ensure these measures are contained in a site plan agreement, as the property is already subject to the town's site plan control bylaw, already requiring the submission of a site plan application to permit development. At that time, these matters would be assessed again for a second time. And then just finally, for the benefit of all the properties subject to this holding provision, I just want to point out that I believe the H language as currently drafted could be deemed to be inconsistent with policy 351 and 352 of the recent provincial planning statement. The H language says that the air quality study must identify that there will be no negative or adverse effects, whereas the provincial planning statement provides that sensitive land uses shall be planned and developed to avoid negative or adverse effects, but also contemplates where avoidance is not possible, the effects should be minimized or mitigated. So anyways, I just want to point that out, some food for thought before amendments go to council later this month, as a slight language tweak may avoid some inconsistency issues going forward. Anyways, that's it from me, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you. We'll start with Mayor Collier.
Oops. Thank you, Chair. And just, I'll try and do this as a question. Mr. Butcher, were you aware that I will be bringing amendments later on that will satisfy some of your items that you brought up in your correspondence?
I had heard that
regarding.
I had heard end of day on Friday, just because we only realized this was happening on a Friday. There had been some messages flying around, and so yeah, if an amendment can be to put through to kind of address this issues, that will solve our concerns.
I think the one that pertains to you is the zoning schedule, specifically map 19, be amended to remove holding provision 31 from lands municipally known as 33 Hunt Street, which were subject to zoning bylaw amendment application Z20/24 and approved through bylaw 86/2025. That will satisfy your concern?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee to the delegate? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Butcher, for joining us on the call today. Oh, no, he's good. To the clerk, any other speakers from the public? No? Okay, going once, twice. Okay, we are now closing the public comment portion of this public meeting. So now we're going to start with, we're back to item PDS 2026-17. We have a presentation, Michael Sawchuk, on the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw Review Phase 2 Final Amendment. Mr. Sawchuk? Do you want to hit the head with the 3 lines emanating from the head to ask to speak? There you are.
Good afternoon. I'm just waiting for the presentation to load here. All right, should be up there now. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Sawchuk. I'm a senior planner with the town, and I'm going to be speaking to you today about the Phase 2 final amendment for the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw Review. So a little bit of background. The town's completing a comprehensive review of its zoning bylaw to ensure that it implements the town's official plan and aligns with provincial regulations and policies. Now, this is a project that has been ongoing for some time, and it has played out in 3 major parts. The first part dates back to March 2015, when discussion papers were released to initiate the conversation on the zoning bylaw direction. In June 2024, Part 2 was undertaken, and that was the release of 8 different technical reports and also a draft bylaw. And that was really designed to outline the proposed changes to the zoning bylaw as proposed by staff. Now, the final stage is Part 3 approvals. Now, in March 2025, we brought forward a set of amendments related to additional dwelling units, and those were approved by council. And now we are looking to bring forward the remaining amendments. So a little bit about the consultation strategy that we've undertaken. And this slide really only highlights what's been done since June 2024. There was also a fair bit of consultation that emanated from the original part of this project back in March 2015. So since June 2024, staff have held 4 different open house sessions. Those were largely those were largely in the summer 2024. Just making sure the slides align here. I think there's a bit of a lag. So there have also been several pop-up events that have happened. Those were largely through the Ajax Markets and Trailfest. And we held agency and industry stakeholder meetings as well in August 2024, and statutory public meetings in October 2024 and March 2025, and of course, the meeting happening today. I should also mention that we have met with dozens of property owners who have issued comments on the zoning bylaw in the time since June 2024. And our Zoning Our Future IMO page has actually resulted in close to 7,000 visits. Now, as a result of this consultation, we have received 510 unique requests for revisions to the zoning bylaw. And all of those requests, as well as staff's responses, are included as attachment 1 to the report. Now, when it comes to the scope of the amendments, we're proposing to make hundreds of revisions here, and some of those are quite large. They are things like the addition of new zones, new definitions, new and revised standards, but many of them are also minor changes. So these are things like formatting and grammar and just ensuring that the document as it exists is in a clean and consistent format. Now, most of the planning revisions are actually outlined in detail in the June 2024 technical reports. So what I'm going to focus mainly on today is matters of previous interest to members of council, as well as matters that have impacted by new revisions since the release of the June 2024 technical reports. But before I get into those, I just wanted to do a quick overview of the scope of some of these changes. So amendments include a range of actions, introduction of new zones to ensure that uses built form align with the vision of the official plan, introduction of new uses to support economic goals and the development of mixed-use communities, revise transportation standards to reduce parking rates, provide flexibility through shared parking and TDM measures, and also introduce bicycle parking, upgraded environmental standards to protect sensitive areas and hazard lands, and then also an introduction of a pedestrian street classification system, which will align built form with the road hierarchy. So now getting into some of the issues that have been of previous interest to council, and I will start with the definition of height. So back at the March 24th, 2025 meeting, council directed staff to measure height of a pitched roof to its highest peak. And in response, the definition for height has been restructured to generally measure height to the highest point of the building. Now, I will mention there are some exceptions in both non-residential and mixed use areas where height excludes parapets, but otherwise we will be measuring to the highest point of the building. We now base measurements of height from the crown of the street rather than from the established grade. And we've also included language that clarifies how height is to be calculated when there is frontage onto more than one street. And that essentially takes an average from the various frontages. When it comes to ADU standards, most of these were implemented through the March 2025 amendments, but in the time that has passed, we have determined that the bylaw could benefit from some minor tweaks. So staff are proposing revisions that would exempt detached ADUs from zone-specific lot coverage maximums, increase the lot coverage maximum for accessory buildings from 10% to 15%, where there's a detached ADU on the property, reduce the minimum width of an unobstructed path from 1.2 meters to 0.8 meters, and permit a detached ADU on lots with either a duplex or a triplex. Now, in relation to home-based businesses, the March 24th council meeting also directed staff to permit takeout restaurants as a form of home-based business, to prohibit patios and limit home-based businesses to one per property. So as a result of that, staff are proposing to make some revisions, one of which would be to only permit takeout restaurants as home-based businesses in live-work units. So the intention behind this is that live-work units are typically fronting onto higher-order streets and typically in mixed-use communities. So there would be less of an impact with a takeout restaurant in a live-work unit than there would be in a traditional residential unit in a traditional residential area. We will also be restricting outdoor patios at home-based businesses. And we have decided not to limit the number of home-based businesses per property, as we do believe that sufficient restrictions already exist to limit per property occurrences. And we do believe that in some situations, it may actually be beneficial to have more than one home-based business on a single property. When it comes to short-term rentals, again, going back to the March 24th, 2025 meeting, staff were directed to add a definition for short-term rental, to permit the use of short-term rentals in all urban zones, and to revise the definition for bed and breakfast establishment. So as a result, staff are proposing revisions that would permit short-term rentals in urban residential zones. We're also looking to create a greater distinction in the definitions between bed and breakfast establishment and a short-term rental. And how we will be doing that is essentially saying that a bed and breakfast establishment is one where the host is on site for the duration of the visitor's stay, and a short-term rental is one where the host is not on site for the duration of the stay. In addition to this, we are looking to migrate all of the performance standards in relation to short-term rentals to a new section in the general provisions. When it comes to places of worship, initially we were not planning to make any changes to the parking rate, and the historical rate for that use was 1 parking space per every 4 persons maximum capacity in the largest room of assembly. Now, this has resulted in an undersupply of parking at places of worship, especially given that many of the places of worship actually include multiple rooms of assembly. So we're proposing to change the rate to the greater of 1 parking space per every 4 persons maximum capacity in all rooms of capacity, or 10 spaces per 100 square meters of gross floor area, and it is the greater of those two that would apply. The most significant update since the June 2024 draft zoning bylaw is the undoing or the pausing of several proposed amendments, and these are really taking place in 3 distinctive areas. The first is in relation to employment areas. So Bill 97 and the provincial planning statement in 2024 introduced new restrictions for employment areas that somewhat conflicted with the direction we were taking for much of our employment areas. So instead, we've decided to shift that consideration to the town's the official plan review and to reconsider the standards for employment areas through that process. It's a similar situation for the GO Station mixed use zone. So we were originally planning on implementing this zone through the zoning bylaw. And now we're planning to actually advance that separately as part of the town's GO Station secondary plan study. So the last item I'll mention here is the urban design provisions. There was quite a few comments received from property owners about the urban design provisions. So we've decided to put many of these on hold so that they could be considered in more detail through the official plan review. It should also be mentioned that we've made several site-specific amendments, and this really came about in situations where property owners approached us with concerns about how the amendments would affect their property. And in these cases, we tried to work with these property owners to understand their issues and to explore alternative solutions. In some cases where alternative approaches were warranted and site-specific exemptions already existed, staff were able to amend the existing exception to provide site-specific relief from new minor provisions of the zoning bylaw. Now, lastly, I'll speak to the transition provisions. So we've received several comments from property owners with concern about how these new standards would impact their ongoing development applications. And in response, we're proposing new transition provisions that will ensure that the existing bylaw standards continue to apply to planning and building permit applications that were actually submitted before the approval of the zoning bylaw amendments. So this would apply to site plan applications, land division, minor variance, draft plans of subdivision, and plans of condominium, as well as building permit applications. One interesting aspect of the transition provisions is that it allows for the less restrictive parking rates to apply, regardless of whether those are in the former version of the zoning bylaw or the new amended version. And we will also, these transition provisions will expire after 5 years, which provides some incentive for our development partners to work these through the process. So in terms of the amendment strategy, all of the proposed zoning bylaw amendments have been captured in a series of 10 bylaws, and those are attachments 2 through 11 with the report. Each amendment bylaw essentially represents one section of the zoning bylaw, but there are some instances where multiple shorter sections have been combined into one bylaw document. The successful implementation of these amendments will close a decades-long process to ensure that the zoning bylaw conforms to the town's official plan and other provincial planning requirements. And staff will continue to monitor amendments to determine if further adjustments are necessary into the future. So that wraps up my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sawchuk, and Councillor Henry and Councillor Tyler Moore, and I see you in the queue. What I'm going to do actually is I'm going to move up the report just so we can deal with that first. So can I get a mover using the hand function? Mover and seconder for the report, please. Just put her on the floor. I see Regional Councillor Crawford and Councillor Henry. Thank you. So the report is on now on the floor. You can now ask questions to the presentation and the report. We will start with Councillor Henry.
Thank you. Okay, I have some questions here and I'm flipping screens, so bear with me. My first question, I'm going to go to page 15 of the report and a little section that talks about provision postponed in section 4.2.8. So this section is talking about operation is limited to 180 days of the calendar year. The requirements prevent scenarios where investors purchase properties to be used permanently as short-term rentals. So, Mr. Sawanchuk, my question is, does operation include, when we're talking about the operation time limit, and you can only operate for as a short-term rental for 180 days, does that include the time it's on the market, or is it referring to occupancy?
So through the chair to Councillor Henry, that would refer more to occupancy, so to the time that it's actually being rented out as a place to stay by any visitors. And what the intention is here with all of those provisions is to ensure that short-term rentals are being utilized for truly what they were intended to be. And that is somebody who lives in the community. Let's say they're going overseas for a short time and they want to ensure that they can earn some income in their primary place of residence. These provisions ensure that that's done in a manageable way. And what it does prevent is it prevents scenarios where people are actually buying new properties, using those as full-time Airbnbs or short-term rentals of any kind, and where those are then being rented by people and there's no oversight by the owner while people are staying on site.
But isn't, this is where I looked at this more closely, because it seems the opposite to me, because if we're saying that if you're using it as a short-term rental for the time that it's occupied as a short-term rental within 180 days, seems like a longer time provision than, let's say it's on the market 180 days and you've only rented it 6 times and you've used up your 180 days and you can't do it anymore. That seems like the shorter provision as opposed to the other. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Sure. I do understand what you're saying. Yeah, and that is I would suggest that that is more of something we can look at from the administrative side in terms of how it's enforced by bylaw. The intention with the 180 days is to ensure that it's less than half the year that it's being used for this purpose, because obviously the remainder of the year it should be being used as that person's primary residence. So I do note the points you've made, and I think we will have the opportunity to work with bylaw and ensure that it's enforced in the way that makes the most sense.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And when we talk about, well, actually here, let me just go back to my notes because there's a few others I have. So for home-based businesses, page 12, we're talking about live-work units have been specifically designed to accommodate commercial activity and as such typically front onto high order streets. And you mentioned that in your presentation. I'm just wondering, I'm trying to picture this in my mind. Is there an example of that? A specific example?
There is, yes. I'm trying to think of an exact address. There's a new, somewhat new development just south of Hunt Street, where, so this is right beside the Legion, the development that's happening there. Some of those units have been designed as live-work units. So they actually have some commercial space
yes.
at the front of the building that fronts out onto the street. So in a scenario like that, we think it's actually, it's reasonable for somebody to have a takeout restaurant in that kind of a building because it's designed to provide that commercial area as part of the residence. Where we don't think it's appropriate is where you have more standard residential neighborhoods. And we've seen through the past that there can be conflict in terms of competing land uses there. When you have an establishment that is quite popular and quite successful, it can result in, you know, long lineups, lots of issues with parking on the street, trespass, all that sort of thing. So for that particular use, takeout restaurants, we're implementing it so that they can only take place in live-work units.
And is that going to be an issue when it comes to, I know the one you're referring to off of Hunt Street, and that's like a townhouse style unit. Is that not going to be problematic for the existing townhome owners, and if they're not using it as a restaurant, or if they're not using a commercial space in the front, is that not going to create a problem? Have we thought about that?
So I would suggest it wouldn't create a problem because that's how these units have actually been designed. So when people were purchasing these units, they would be aware that they do have a commercial aspect to them. If people choose not to take advantage of that commercial aspect, I mean, that's up to them and they have every right to do that. But I do think they are aware that there is that ability for them to use a portion of their property for a commercial purpose.
Okay. And then when we refer to places of worship, will the new rules for parking be grandfathered in? Like, how will that work for grandfathered properties? Will they be exempt from the rules, or will they be mandated to conform to the new compliance rules, the bylaw? How will that work?
So that's a good question. So the way it works is when any of these new standards are introduced, they're going to apply to any land uses, any new land uses, any new buildings moving forward. So it's not a situation where we are able to be retroactive in terms of what those parking standards are. So I think in scenarios where we have existing places of worship that do have issues with parking, the town will need to continue working with those hosts to ensure that all of the parking issues are resolved.
Okay. And employment area reset in the report. I just want to clarify that you're not asking or allowing for additional gas stations in that area zoning, correct?
No, we are not. So we were planning to make a number of changes to the employment areas, largely in relations to zoning provisions. So things like setbacks and build within zones. But when the province came out with all kinds of new standards and new requirements for employment areas, we decided it was best to sort of back off at this point, tuck those aside, and then study that more in depth through our official plan review, where we could take the time necessary to look at the new framework for employment areas and then implement things that would align more closely with the province's rules.
Because I thought, I could be wrong, but didn't we pass something with a zoning bylaw amendment? Was it for Ward 2 or was it for the town about no more gas stations? Something along that lines?
Yes, I believe there was something that related to gas stations and to storage facilities as well. And because that was council direction, that is the one item that has moved forward. So when it comes to gas stations were never zoned to be permitted in employment areas to begin with, so we didn't have to make any changes there. But storage units were permitted in the prestige employment zone. So we're looking to move forward with removing that as a permitted land use within the prestige employment zone. But as I said, with gas stations, they were never permitted to begin with, so we didn't actually have to make any changes to prevent them moving forward.
And with the storage unit, I believe we have one, I think it's up in Ward 2 coming Diamond or something. That's still going to be allowed, correct?
In that particular case, it all depends on how our transition provisions play out. So if for them to be continued to have permissions there, they would have to get an application into the town, a complete application, before the zoning amendments are approved by council, which it would be expected on June 22nd.
Oh, well, there you go. Hope somebody's watching this meeting and gets a move on that. Okay, then. And my last question for now is with regards to the short-term rentals. And we put provisions in place for I've seen the definition. Thank you for that. Thank you to staff for working on that. With regards to, is it Countryside north of Taunton Road? That's not permitted, correct?
Correct. So we are focusing on the urban residential zones for the permission of short-term rentals. So those provisions won't be extended to the CRA and the CRB zones.
Thank you. Much appreciated. There's a large group of residents up in that area that thank you for that. Thank you. Those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Just so the committee knows, based on the breadth of the report, I'm going to allow everyone 10 minutes with an option to come back for a second 5 minutes if you have any further questions. So knowing that, Councillor Tyler Moran, it's all up to you now.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Sawchuk, for your vast report. There was a lot of work, I'm sure, you and your team. So on your home-based business slide, there is a staff are proposing revisions that would, and in this case, it says only permit takeout restaurants, restrict outdoor patios at home-based businesses. But just for the record, would it also include, is there a distinction between the inside of a home? So if you're doing a guitar lesson in the basement or a piano lesson in the living room or tutoring math or whatever, or if you're doing swimming lessons outside, or if you're doing barbecue hot dogs outside, you know what I mean? Are there two different distinctions there? That's my first question.
Sure. So through the chair to Councillor Tyler Moran, yes. So the way the home-based business provisions work is that the home-based business must be restricted to the inside of the home. So there's no component of it that can be outdoors, which is why we've put in the prohibition of patios, for example. And the intention for that is to ensure that any effects on neighbors are limited. So in addition to restricting them to the inside of the house, there are also other restrictions that relate to things like the floor area of the home that can be used for that purpose.
Okay, that's a little problematic because, more specifically, there has been situations where a swimming lesson is compared to a piano lesson. One's down in the homeowner's backyard, fairly unintrusive. But you're saying as we speak, and it's not something that you would consider as being part of the revisions, correct?
Correct. And that's historical nature in the sense that the way the provisions exist now do not allow for any part of the home-based business to happen outside of the home. So this isn't anything new that's being introduced. This is just status quo for that requirement.
My question had the spirit of moving forward, but okay. The second thing is there any provisions that would be in place? Because the first thing that happens is an increase in traffic. There's always a parking problem because if the business is doing well, which obviously you want them to do, there's two types of businesses. Again, if you're doing a piano lesson at 11 and a piano lesson at 12, it's a little more regulated. But if you're selling cookies inside your house or knitted sweaters and everybody shows up at the same time, can the home-based businesses say, hold on, these are my customers, don't give them tickets? Or is it just regular parking?
So the way that home-based businesses should work is they should be secondary in nature to the residential character of the property. So the intention is that these are small businesses that allow for some flexibility in people working from home, but they do not sort of overtake the character of the property. The property still, reads from the street as a home generally would. So we are very much aware of some of the impacts that can come about by way of a home-based business. So we're trying to be somewhat clear in the way we manage the types of businesses that do operate as well. So in the past, it's been very open-ended. We didn't have a tightly defined list of the types of businesses that could operate from a home. Now we do. So we specify that the business types that could exist as home-based businesses are art galleries, artisan studios or workshops, catering services, commercial schools, home-based childcare, office, personal service shop, or service or repair shop. So it's a very limited list to things that we think could function well within a neighborhood setting. In addition to that, we've also introduced a new provision that would limit the number of clients or customers on site at any time to 3. So the intention there is, let's say you're somebody that works from home as a hairstylist. You have your one person sitting in the chair. You have your next person arriving for their meeting, their hairstyling appointment. And then perhaps, it takes a few minutes for the first person to move onward. So at any time, you may have 3 people on site. We think that's a very manageable system. And it also makes it very clear to people before they decide to undertake a home-based business that if they're looking at a use that really has no controls over the number of people coming onto site at any time, it's likely not an appropriate use as a home-based business.
Okay, thanks for speaking to the report publicly. I appreciate that. 2 more quick questions. Where does the garage fall into this? Because if you're fixing, I wouldn't say radios, but if you're fixing guitars, or if you're fixing whatever you're fixing, because you said that's allowed, can somebody do it from their garage?
They can, as long as it's not taking away a required parking space for the property. So let's say we have a scenario where somebody has 1 parking space. Let's say it's a detached home. They have 1 parking space in their garage, 1 parking space in the driveway. Those are the 2 required parking spaces for that home. Wherever there's a home-based business, you require an additional parking space. So now there's a requirement for 3 parking spaces. If somebody were to offer a home-based business out of their garage and eliminated one of those 2 parking spaces, in the scenario I've given, that would be an issue, because not only does it remove one of the required spaces, but it also doesn't accommodate the 3rd space that would be required to support the business. So it's a bit of a careful dance when considering these uses, as well as existing properties and how much parking they can contain. And that's why I said earlier on that in some cases, where you have large properties that have an expansive parking and there are also multiple units on the property, there could be scenarios where there are actually 2 home-based businesses on the property, but everything makes sense because there's enough room. Parking really does tend to be the limiting factor when it comes to home-based businesses. So in the garage, it's likely to impact that even further.
Okay, my final question regarding property taxes. So if number 42 pays $5,000 a year in taxes, number 44 pays $5,000 a year in taxes, but number 44 has a thriving home-based business, does number 44 have to pay a business tax on top of the regular property tax?
It's an interesting question, and I'm going to say that is outside of my field of expertise as a planner. So I can't answer that one off the top of my head, unfortunately. But we could look into that further and get a response for you.
Is there, through you, Chair? Thank you, Mr. Sawchuk. Through you, Mr. Chair, is there someone on staff that could answer that question at this time, perhaps?
Any planner willing to step up to answer that question?
Or if our Director of Finance, I'm just suggesting.
Councillor Tyler Morin, to repeat your question one more time.
My question is, if you're at number 42 and you pay $6,000 a year in property tax, number 44 pays $6,000 in property tax, but number 44 has a thriving home-based business, does number 44 have to pay an additional business tax?
Mr. McCauley, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, we'd have to reach out to MPAC to get information on that, on taxes.
That's a question that's out there right now, because if you own a business, you have to pay tax on that business and you have to pay property or business tax. But if you do it all within your home, if you're complying, okay, we can. Do you want to go offline on this, Mr. McCullough? Maybe you could get back to me on this.
Yeah, so through the chair, I think that would be the best approach. We can, our team can reach out to MPAC and get that information for you.
Okay, I appreciate it. We'll just leave it for there. Thank you for the extra time, Mr. Chair.
My pleasure. Thank you. Mayor Collier.
Thank you, Chair. No questions. I just have an amendment that the clerk has regarding some of the items that have been brought up already.
Yep, we just need a quick second for the clerk to put it on the screen. Do you have a seconder, Mayor Collier?
I don't right now. These are staff-initiated changes that I was asked to bring forward. Our second delegation spoke to some of them to do with Hunt Street. These are administrative in nature. Anybody that wants to second them, please step up.
I see Councillor Henry has volunteered to second, so now it's now on the floor. The amendments are now on the floor. Do you wish to speak to them, Mayor Collier?
I believe I've already spoken to it. These are administrative for the most part. They're staff initiated. I just said I would bring them forward today.
Thank you. So I see Councillor Bauer, Councillor Crawford on the queue. For the amendments, if you have any wish to comment or questions, please use the hand raise function. Seeing none, thank you. We're going to go ahead. Oh, Councillor Bauer on the amendment.
Thank you, Chair Lee. Just for clarification, when I get my turn to speak, I will be talking about the social impact assessment with a possible motion for an amendment. Should we include that in here or do it separately?
Councillor Bauer, I think it's cleaner if we do it as a separate amendment. It's not necessarily connected to these ones.
Thank you.
Okay. And then if you don't mind selecting to speak again, I'll move you up in the queue. Thank you. All right, last call for any questions or comments on the amendments. Seeing none, thank you very much. We'll start the vote. And that passes. Thank you very much. Next, we had Councillor Bauer, then Regional Councillor Crawford.
Oh. Okay, thank you very much, Chair Lee. Good afternoon, Mr. Sawchuk. Thank you very much for all the work that has been put into this. Really, really appreciate it. All 780 pages of the agenda or so. But I will comment the attachment, the comment matrix of the 500 plus comments issued. I read them all. I was very happy to see some of the Ward 3 residents who made input, and some of their input actually did impact the results. So I appreciate that staff is listening, and that's a lot of work. So my question is about the definition of height. And I'm sorry, I don't understand some of the words, but I know the intent of that initial request was, for example, in the neighborhood 1 area or the wartime homes area, where people were buying property, tearing down the house, and then building what they called monster homes. And this height change came in place so that there could be some sort of consistency and maybe a slight decrease to the height of these homes. With the changes that you've put in for today, the restructuring, does that still all apply? Like what does that mean? Like what's the crown of a street, for example?
Sure. So through the chair to Councillor Bauer. Yes, so all of that still applies. The main difference, the main change we're looking at here is measuring to the highest point of the building when we're looking at residential buildings. So in the past, the way that we've measured peaked roofs was to the midpoint. So if you have, your roof going like that, you're only measuring to right there. And our 11-meter standard would measure to that midpoint. The way we're moving forward with the definition of height is, as I suggested, it's to the highest point of the building. So we would now measure to the very peak of that roof. Now, what that's going to mean in terms of real world implications is that buildings in the past that the peaks could have been at 12.5 meters, 13 meters, they will have to come down to 11 meters or less. So it is going to have real impacts on how high you can build your buildings. Some of the other things, like where we measure from when we're measuring height, the crown of the street, the intention with that was to provide more of a uniform process when you look at an entire streetscape. Previously, we were looking at measuring at the building wall. And the problem that was presented there is there are little loopholes that people could have exploited. People could have graded their properties so that it moved upwards on a hill. And then that's going to afford them more room to go higher because you're only measuring from grade. When you measure at the midpoint of the street, that ensures a consistent place to measure for all units on that street. And it's going to result in a more standardized streetscape when it comes to height permissions.
Okay, so what the original request, when it first came up last year, is being met. So I just wanted confirmation on that. Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate that. So then my second question is in response to the delegation from Ms. Mercurius about the social impact assessment. And I apologize for not contacting you sooner with my questions, but can you talk to us about that? Is that something that's included in this type of report or in this type of action? Should it be? If it should be, why isn't it? What's involved with it, etc.?
Sure. So the short answer to that one is yes and no in terms of what's been done in the past. So no, we have not created a separate report that looks solely at social impacts. But what we have done, and what we're doing in this case, is we're largely just implementing existing measures that exist in our OP. Now, prior to being added to our OP, there were a number of planning studies and a number of reports that were done. And in many cases, those were supported by research looking at social impacts. So when you kind of take a step back and look at the existing official plan provisions, social impacts have been considered. Now what we're doing is we're just implementing them into a zoning framework. So my response would be that social impacts have been considered. There just isn't a separate report out there that runs alongside the amendments that we're looking to make. And I think my supervisor, Mr. McCullough, may have some additional comments here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And through the chair to Councillor Bauer. So I think this request might be would be better to be directed towards the official plan review. We had been hoping to look at the official plan review through an equity lens as well. So I think that it might be good to set up a meeting with the delegate and kind of talk through kind of the impacts that they want us to take a look at. Because as Mike mentioned, the current official plan permits special needs housing in all designations that permit residential uses. So shelters fall in that category. And in the written correspondence from the delegate, they had identified things like the DCA ME1, which is an employment transition zone, as well as the PE zone. And there are, from the PE zone perspective, there are provincial policies that prohibit uses like residential and institutional uses from locating into employment areas. So I think that was one of the original concerns the delegate had. But I think certainly we can meet with the delegate, and that might be a good approach to kind of understand what they're hoping to look at, and maybe there's something that we can look at through the official plan review.
Okay, I appreciate that information. And yes, I think that's a great idea to meet with her and see what it is, the expectation, and how it can be used. But my question with that sort of plan, by not including a social impact assessment in as an amendment to this comprehensive review, does that impact, like leaving it out, does that make a difference? Or had there been one in here, would that have made a difference too? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so through the chair, there are a few changes that we're making through this comprehensive review that would touch on some of these elements. So crisis care facility is already permitted use in areas of the downtown. The only changes that we were making, though, and I think this may also help the situation, is we were just updating the definition to reflect the definition in the crisis care bylaw that was passed earlier this year, that is designed to help manage some of those issues.
Okay. So by moving this request out of this review and into a discussion regarding the official plan review, there is no disadvantage as far as what the resident is talking about, or those kinds of negative impacts that, you know, that she's talking about have already happened or could happen, by keeping it a separate issue. Is that correct? So
through the chair, I think that's correct. If there are any, and I know the delegate raised issues related to the temporary use bylaw. So yes, in the DCA ME1 zone, that use was a prohibited use. And I believe that temporary use bylaw was repealed as well. So it would continue to be a prohibited use in that zone. Okay, so then can I just take it that
this meeting will be arranged and we'll have discussions to figure that all out, or do you need an actual direction to do that?
So through the chair to Councillor Bauer, we're happy to make that connection with the delegate and arrange a meeting. And if you'd want to be involved, we're happy to invite you as well.
Thank you very much. Yes, I would love to come and listen and learn. Thank you very much, Mr. McCullough. Thank you, Mr. Sawchuk. And those are my questions for now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Regional Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Sawchuk, for this detailed report. I noticed that I don't know if I found it creepy or not, but that the way you track the movement of people in different locations for shopping, and you do it through mobile phones. Am I reading that right?
So maybe I'll jump in, Mike. So through the chair to Regional Councillor Crawford, I think that's for our next presentation or two presentations.
Oh, I'm in the wrong one? Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, I'll hold my question. Sorry, I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you. For a second time is Councillor Tyler Morin.
Thank you so much. I promise I'll be quick. So in the recommendation, it says number one, to be received for information. But then number two says to be endorsed and forwarded to the June 22nd council meeting for approval. So what we're talking about here and all that it encompasses, is it true that we will have, this is going through as per the council meeting and as per the vote? Or is it to be received for information?
Both, Councillor Tyler Morin. The report is going to be received for information, and then the implementing zoning bylaws, the attachments, will be forwarded to the June council meeting, if that clarifies.
Okay. Well, the reason why I asked is because I did ask for the distinction, and I have a lot to say. I shouldn't say have a lot to say about it, but if we make the distinction, if you have a home-based business, you have to pay a property tax, like for that business. I wanted it to be tied to a threshold, which means we're getting deep here. You know, like obviously, if you're a teenager doing tutoring for a grade 6 student in math, I wouldn't consider that. Not that I'm an expert on any of this, but you know, we'd have to have a financial threshold. So I don't know if that needs, you know, anything above $10,000 a year. I don't know if that needs an amendment that I would bring forward, or it's just something I would just leave for now.
Councillor Morin, I'm going to clean this up for you if that helps. At the June 22nd council meeting, when those attachments come to council, after you received all the information you have and gotten, you know, spoken with staff, you're able to pull it at council to then amend as needed if you still think it's necessary.
Okay.
So because again, we weren't able to provide you all the information you had asked for, my suggestion is why don't we kind of table this, you know, you ask your questions with staff, and then in 3 weeks you can pull this, and if you think amendments are needed, you can add the amendment at that point.
I understand. Yeah. Okay.
Does that work for you?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ms. Andis, did you want to jump in there? You had queued up.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. It's just to reply to Councillor Tyler Morin's comment. Financial impacts are not something that is we can implement in a land use planning tool. So we will look into it with MPAC, and we will circle back with you to discuss it further so you have more clarity on that before the council meeting.
Great. Thank you. Councillor, are you just going to say okay? Yeah, that's what I figured. Okay. For second and final time, Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to go back to some correspondence we received from a planning company with regards to Diamond and the 500 Salem Road North property. So one of the requests in their documentation is a site-specific exemption be provided for 500 Salem Road North in footnote 7 to the permitted use in section 6.4.1. This would continue the permissions for the public storage facility and would continue to facilitate the development of the property with a Diamond Center. So going back to that request within, where are we standing with that? Because I heard you say, look, you need a site plan application before the end of the month. I don't know that that's feasible. I don't know where they are in this. I already have staff in the back end working on getting in contact with them and seeing where they are. If I need to bring forth an amendment at the council meeting, should I choose to do so, is that a possibility? And Mr. Sawanchuk, where are we on this? 2 questions.
Perhaps
Sure,
I can
so-
answer
so-
that. Yes. So through the chair
Sure.
to Councillor Henry. For us to be able to provide an exemption in the zoning bylaw, we would need some type of application to know exactly what it is they are proposing on that site. It's hard to create an exception for something that we don't have information on. They did pre-consult in 2024 with town staff. They were aware that these prohibitions were going to be implemented in the zoning bylaw eventually. So as Mr. Sawchuk has noted previously, if they are able to get in a complete application, a complete site plan application prior to council's approval of the zoning bylaw amendments, then they would be captured under the transition provisions.
And Ms. Anderson, how long would that take to do? Do they have enough time? Is that reasonable to say that they could do that by the end of the month?
It's not a lot of time, and I'm unaware of whether or not they have been doing any work in the background.
Sorry, I can't hear you. Something's cutting out with your mic.
Okay, so it is a short period of time to get a complete application in if you're starting from the beginning, but I am also unaware of whether or not they have been doing any work in the background to prepare for an application submission.
Okay, so can I ask that we reach out to, I've asked Michael from our department, from ECD, to reach out to them. Can I ask that you coordinate with him then and see what stage these folks are at? I'd rather know and deal with it prior to council meeting than deal with it after the fact.
Yes, of course. Mr. Sawchuk can follow up with you on that matter.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And let me just check my notes quickly. I do apologize. I have multiple screens open here. I just want to make sure that there's nothing else I needed to ask on the short-term rental situation. I think that was it for now. Anything that we discover after, we still have the council meeting to bring forth changes or amendments, correct?
Councillor Henry, that is correct.
All right, so that's enough for now for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of committee you wish to speak for a second time? Seeing none then, so we have the 2 recommendations moved by Mayor Collier, seconded by Councillor Henry. As amended, I'll read the recommendations of the report dated June 1st, 2026, entitled Zoning Our Future, Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw Review, Phase 2, Final Amendment, be received for information, and that the implementing zoning bylaws provided as attachments 2 through 11 to town-initiated zoning bylaw amendment application Z10/26 be endorsed and forwarded to the June 22nd, 2026 council meeting for approval, plus the amendments. Any questions, comments, concerns? We'll start the vote then. And that passes. Thank you, everybody. Now we are on to presentation PDS 5.1 PDS-2026-15 Town of Ajax Inclusionary Zoning Assessment Report and Draft Official Plan Amendment and Zoning Bylaw Amendment. Does anyone want to set the table, Sean?
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. And maybe I'll just quickly set the table. So this is one of our Housing Accelerator Fund initiatives, the Inclusionary Zoning Bylaw Review. And today our consultant, Nick Michael, will be the one delivering the presentation on all the great work that they've done. And then at the end of the meeting, I'll just turn it over to Anuj Katharia, who's our planner, and he'll go over the next steps for this project as well. So with that, maybe we'll just turn it over to Nick, if that's okay.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you.
Perfect. I have, oh, there we go. Sorry, I'm just sharing my screen. And there we go. Just wait for it to pop up. Perfect. I see it up on the screen. Well, hello, members of council, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Nick Michael. I'm a partner at the planning and real estate consulting firm NBLC. We specialize in the market and the financial feasibility of real estate development, with a heavy emphasis on pro forma assessments, project feasibility, market analysis, and increasingly affordable housing delivery and policy. By way of experience, we've been assessing inclusionary zoning for municipalities across Ontario since the legislation was introduced in 2018. This includes the communities of Toronto, Mississauga, Brampton, Markham, Whitby, London, Ottawa, KW, and many others. So let's begin by first identifying what inclusionary zoning is. I may also abbreviate and say IZ for short during this presentation. Well, inclusionary zoning allows a municipality to require that a specified proportion of units within new residential development be provided as affordable housing, which is a very big deal because this is the first time that municipalities have been given the authority to require affordable housing through the development process that is not tied to site-specific negotiations or Section 37 type agreements. However, it is important to identify that it can only be applied within protected major transit station areas, which for Ajax is, of course, the Ajax Go PMTSA, which means there will be lots of areas in the town where these requirements would not apply. Importantly, any property that has a development application in place or entitlements already approved would be exempt from the policy. Now, of course, it is important to identify, while inclusionary zoning certainly does sound really great in theory, being able to require affordable housing through new development, it's also important to note that IZ does impact project viability by reducing the sale price or rent that a developer can charge, which can, of course, make new development unviable. If not calibrated appropriately to the market, a policy of this nature could reduce and delay new housing supply, which would actually worsen affordability conditions, as we would not be accommodating new market or any affordable housing, in addition to directing growth and development away from strategic transit-oriented growth nodes to locations where inclusionary zoning would not apply. The ideal scenario is one where development can continue to advance while also producing the required amount of affordable housing with minimal impacts. And for this reason, the province requires, through IZ Regulation 232/18, that a municipality thoroughly assesses market conditions and conduct pro forma assessments to ensure that IZ can be implemented without stalling or eroding the viability of new development. Only once these conditions have been proven, only then can IZ be implemented, and this analysis must also be peer-reviewed by a qualified firm. This is the analysis that I've completed for the town, which I'll now summarize, which was successfully peer-reviewed and found acceptable by the land economics firm Urban Metrics. Now, without spending too much time on this slide, we really could probably talk about the market and everything that's currently happening for hours. It is important to identify that residential and particularly high-density residential market conditions are just facing unprecedented challenges that are resulting really in a complete collapse of new construction activity across the broader GTA. On the one hand, we have construction costs that have nearly doubled on us since the COVID-19 pandemic, after increasing at or slightly above inflation for over a decade. At the same time, elevated interest rates have increased borrowing costs for developers while also reducing demand and pricing levels in the market. Demand and overall pricing has been further impacted by economic uncertainty, recession fears, tariff threats, and of course, reduced immigration levels. And all of this is also impacting the risk profiles of lenders, making access to financing more restrictive and difficult. If you cannot secure financing for a high-density residential project, there is no possibility or avenue to move that project forward. Developers are therefore facing very high costs and at the same time reduced demand and pricing levels, as well as increased risk for both rental and condominium apartments. All of this is resulting in projects facing unviable and unfavorable conditions, with construction slowing drastically across the province, which also includes in the town of Ajax. In response to this, we're seeing all levels of government respond by advancing policy changes and funding commitments to try and accelerate housing supply. Everything from easier approval frameworks, as of right zoning entitlements, and reducing fees and charges, including development charges, as well as other fees like HST. Of course, it is important to recognize that IZ would be the opposite of this, as it's a further constraint, challenge, and cost on development feasibility. So in addition to our market research, we also completed pro forma assessments of a 12, 25, 35, and 60-story residential apartment within the Ajax PMTSA. We assess each building as both condo and rental. And we begin first by assessing the viability of each scenario without any affordable housing. And then we start layering on 5% affordable housing in both ownership and rental tenure to understand the impact. And this 5% threshold is the maximum allowed by the provincial regulations. And given the current market, we unsurprisingly found negative results. None of the development forms were found to be viable today, even without an affordable housing requirement. As affordable housing is then added, of course, viability worsens, indicating that a financial subsidy would be necessary for these projects to advance today over the near term, beyond the expedited approvals and heightened density that's already been provided. And just reflecting how challenging things currently are and how much construction costs have accelerated on us, the subsidies required are not small, ranging anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 per unit, depending on the scenario and context under evaluation. We therefore do not find that IZ would be viable and implemented without impacting housing supply, which was again also supported by the peer review, as well as virtually every other municipality currently exploring inclusionary zoning. Now, this does not mean that development will not occur in the PMTSA. It's certainly possible that under specific circumstances, situations where developers acquired land at a low cost many years ago, probably combined with them also securing very valuable low-cost CMHC financing, and likely also advancing with a lower return expectation, a project may advance. However, broad viability is not observed, with our modeling indicating highly challenging economic conditions for developments of this density. And with these findings in mind, there's really three options we can consider for an inclusionary zoning policy framework. We can implement the IZ policy, but not activate the requirements until market conditions improve. So essentially, we implement the policy framework, but we wait until market conditions present more viable and favorable conditions until we actually turn it on. Alternatively, we can implement IZ today with the IZ requirement, but with the subsidies that I identified on the last slide. So this would eliminate and neutralize the negative impact of inclusionary zoning, but of course it would be expensive and require a significant budget to support, or we can refrain from implementing IZ altogether. In our report and analysis and through consultations and discussions with staff, we recommend option one, which aligns with the direction that the vast majority of municipalities in Ontario are currently taking, because it is really important to identify that the current challenging market conditions will eventually pass. We will one day be out of this currently bleak context. I certainly hope so, and I believe so. And by implementing the policy framework today, this positions Ajax to be ready to activate the policy once conditions allow in a timely and efficient manner. This strategy also allows developers and land markets to be aware of the policy, likely years in advance of it actually being activated, which allows land markets and developers to consider and account for the policies land transacts, as well as to incorporate this requirement into their future business plans. And of course, this also allows time for staff and stakeholders to sort out implementation and administrative frameworks, which are frankly equally as complex as the market and feasibility assessments that we're presenting today. And finally, I just wanted to quickly highlight what other municipalities are doing on this topic of inclusionary zoning. It is important to identify that since IZ was enabled in 2018, only 3 municipalities have been able to prove viable market conditions to implement the policy, which was Toronto, Mississauga, and until recently Kitchener. All 3 were supported by analysis completed by my firm, and all 3 reports were authored prior to 2021 when market conditions were much stronger. Given the current environment, the provincial government recently deactivated inclusionary zoning in these 3 communities until at least July 2027, at which point market conditions will be reevaluated. So therefore, no community currently has an active IZ policy in place at the current time within Ontario. The vast majority of communities, including Ottawa, Oakville, Waterloo, Markham, Newmarket, and others, are all advancing an IZ framework without activating the policy until market conditions improve, exactly as we're recommending here. A smaller group of municipalities have elected not to advance IZ at all for different reasons, and are instead focusing on incentives, land programs, and a host of other strategies to try to achieve their affordable housing objectives. And despite being a common approach to inclusionary zoning in the United States, where they've been using this policy for many decades, we have not seen communities in Ontario implement IZ with a corresponding package of financial incentives. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'll hand it back over to Anuj, and of course be here to help answer any questions that you might have.
Hi, thank you for giving me the opportunity to just piggyback a little on Nick. My name's Anuj and I'm a planner working on the inclusion zoning project with Sean. So before we get into the questions, I would like to just briefly outline the next steps in the process. We, subject to council endorsement today, we plan to undertake consultation activities. These primarily include 3 activities. The first would be an agency consultation session, which will be held with representatives from Durham Region, Metrolinx, and nonprofit housing organizations. This is planned for the 3rd of June as a virtual session. A second separate session, a virtual stakeholder consultation session geared towards landowners and developers, is planned at on June the 12th. And in addition, we are collecting feedback from the general public through the project's IMO page. Questions and comments will be accepted until July the 13th. And following consultation process and considering all the comments received, we plan to bring the final official plan amendment and draft final official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment to council at the September CAP meeting. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you both for the presentation. Councillor Bauer, Councillor Henry, I see you in the queue. I'm going to just jump ahead. Sorry. How did Kitchener make it work? So I get Toronto, Mississauga. Those were 2 biggest cities in Ontario. Why Kitchener? Like, Kitchener has a population of under Markham. Markham, I'd argue, has more financial sustainability. How did Kitchener make IZ work? Oh, don't. You're already in there. Can you hit that same button? And just go ahead.
Apologies. The red icon makes me think I don't have permission to speak. Apologies for that. No, it's actually a really good question. I mean, on the one hand, you know, Kitchener in terms of a high density market is much more mature than, you know, even a lot of communities within Durham region where, you know, they've historically been getting, you know, upwards of 1,000 new condominium and rental apartments every year. But on top of that, you know, there were a number of initiatives that helped spur that, you know, those viable results that we were able to find. One of them was the construction of the LRT. This was having a very significant impact on demand and achievable pricing along that corridor. And at the same time, they implemented, you know, in addition to the transit investment, significant as of right density increases along the corridor. So we had this unique position where, you know, a lot of high density development was not happening along, you know, the central downtowns and along these corridors. So land values were fairly low. And then we had an immediate investment in high order LRT transit combined with upzoning, which again, very different market context in 2021, right? We had condo sale values that were going through the roof, rental rates that were going through the roof. And in addition to that, we had relatively low construction costs. So all of these factors combined started to paint a picture of where, you know, we started to think that viable conditions would be present. But even then, we did not recommend the full 5% set aside rate or affordability requirement because the development economics were certainly not as strong as downtown Mississauga and Toronto. So we wanted to start at a 1% and 2% and slowly phase it in over time.
So how do we determine when market conditions get better? So, I mean, you briefly touched on that, but just what stops the developer being like from saying, oh no, like these conditions are always unacceptable. We always have to keep it at zero.
A truncated new report from a firm like mine would be necessary to undertake new market research and a perform assessment and analysis to prove that conditions would be viable. This would also be a requirement of the inclusionary zoning regulations needed prior to turning the policy on, which would then also need to be peer reviewed by another qualified firm.
But that's incredibly expensive to do each time, is it not? Like we could go through this exercise and the result could still come back zero. Am I incorrect?
The result definitely could come back zero. Yes. In terms of expense, we wouldn't suggest or recommend that, the 200-page report that we just completed would need to be redone every single time. It would be a much smaller and lower effort exercise where we would focus solely on the financial stability.
And if I can add to that, Mr. Chair, I think staff would also do an evaluation and take a look at what's happening in other jurisdictions and then definitely in the broader market before we made that determination to go through that exercise in obtaining that updated report. And we would also be required to seek council approval of any budget to do that.
Does it make sense for us to go hypothetically to like 1% now or 0.5% now? I get market conditions are tough right now, but I also get that realistically Ajax doesn't have much building left. We've signed all these mayor's directives. We know where the intensification projects are coming. If we're going to be at zero for the next 5 to 7 years, just as a round number, then that could preclude us from having any inclusionary zoning during our prime intensification times. Is that correct?
Yes, it certainly is possible. And this is the push and pull that every municipality that's currently considering inclusionary zoning is facing. But unfortunately, the regulations are quite clear and you must be able to prove viable conditions, which is just, unfortunately not possible in the current market and economic times.
Okay, I appreciate the answers. I'd like to hear what other councillors say. So we'll start with Councillor Bauer.
Thank you very much, Chair Lee. Thank you for the report or the presentation, Michael. So I just wanted to confirm, it's in the actual staff report on page 418, the existing approvals in the GO Station PMTSA. It's noted that the findings of the staff report do not have any impact on affordable housing commitments agreed to by approved developments in the Ajax GO Station PMTSA. So I just want to confirm, because on page 439, which is the map of that area, that means that 190 Westney, so 5% of 1,274 units, 493 Bailey Street West, 10% of 1,311 units, 425 Bailey Street, 5 to 10% of 3,308 units. Those have all been committed to, and those developers are obligated to provide affordable housing outside of this report today and the recommendation going forward. I just want confirmation that I'm reading that correctly.
Through the chair to Councillor Bauer, that's correct. So those developers have made those commitments in exchange for accelerated approvals for their developments. And there's been holding provisions that have been applied to those properties that require an agreement to secure that affordable housing units prior to removal of that holding provision, which would enable them to proceed to construction. So that is occurring outside of this. And so we believe that holding provision is what would hold them to those commitments.
Thank you. So even though the result of today's of the report done by the consultant recommends implementation with 0% set aside, if we approve that, these three developments, we don't expect, or they won't be able to come back and appeal their commitment?
So through the chair to Councillor Bauer. So right now there isn't a mechanism for them to appeal. They would have to apply either to remove it or explore other appeal mechanisms. But I would imagine that they may, if they felt that they couldn't meet those obligations, that they would be looking for some sort of adjustment to that commitment, and council would have to look at consideration of that adjustment.
Okay. Okay. I just don't want, and I feel like based on the report, the findings of the consultant's report, I mean, I feel like we really don't have much of a choice here, other than to implement it with a 0%. But knowing that, what my concern is, if we all agree that that is the logical and sensible step at this point, that these developers may try to, use that decision as a reason to justify trying to reduce their commitment.
Yeah, and if I may, and maybe Nick can jump in a moment just to expand on this, but so the justification that they used is that they're getting accelerated timelines, right? So
Correct.
in Nick's performa analysis or in his firm's performa analysis that was completed for our prototypical developments, they assume more of a traditional trajectory in obtaining some of those approvals, and the timelines and the application fees and the studies that go along supporting those types of approvals. So some of that was built into the performa, which of course costs money and drive up some of those costs, where some of these other developers have benefited from not going through that traditional process.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, Mr. Michael, did you have anything else you wanted to add about that?
No, I'll just mention that, what you're describing probably, may happen. We're seeing it happen in the city of Toronto, for instance, where developers that have agreed to affordable housing requirements through secondary planning exercises, employment land conversions is a big one. They're looking at current market conditions and they're trying to make a case that, if we were to move our project forward sooner rather than later, the affordability requirements are kind of getting in our way. But, the good news is that those agreements are completely separate from inclusionary zoning and have no impact on, the validity of those agreements and those what developers have ultimately agreed to. So in the city of Toronto, Mississauga, and other municipalities case where they are dealing with this circumstance right now, they have all held firm and appear to be doing so.
All right, thank you very much. That was my only question, Chair. Thank you.
Just as a follow-up to Councillor Bauer, then, that includes all agreements done through Mayor's Directive, not just the MTSA ones, correct? Like there's some in North Ajax that I believe had affordability requirements built in.
So to you, Chair, that's correct. So IZ, we can only apply to PMTSA, but where there have been commitments outside of the PMTSA, the same mechanism has been used to try to secure those affordable units.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Michael, for your report and your directness. I appreciate you not sugarcoating things. I wish all people that came before as consultants were as direct as you. I'd like to ask a question of you if I can. I'm going to read something and I want you to tell me if I'm accurately understanding this. Municipalities receive no direct funding. Unlike other affordable tools, IZ does not provide municipalities with funding, grants, tax support. Municipalities must still fund infrastructure, transit, parks, and community facilities. Does that make sense?
Yes, 100% correct. I think the point you're getting at is that despite enabling the legislation, the province and federal governments have not provided funding support to help create these affordable units or backfill the fee and charge exemptions through the DCs and parkland fees that you would have to do to support these IZ units. Is that correct?
That is correct. I said it in more plain language, but yes, that is correct. And again, I thank you for your directness. So let me ask this question then, and I don't know if this is the place to ask it, but a while ago, before all this came before us while we were waiting for these reports, we put maximum minimums in this area. I think it was, and Mr. McCullough could correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't it 25 stories for this area? Was that correct?
So through the chair to Councillor Henry, that's correct. But we're still working on that, and council will still need to approve that official plan amendment zoning bylaw, but that is the direction we've been given by council. It's a minimum of 25 stories within approximately 300 meters of the GO station, and a minimum of 12 stories elsewhere in the protected major transit station area.
So I had voted against that at the time, but I am asking this question of you. Should we be looking at higher minimums in correspondence with this report? Is there anything stating that that would help to create development faster?
Unfortunately, it's a really good question, and I find this topic of density relation to feasibility is dominating most of the conversation in my line of work these days. And the primary issue is that in today's market, density has virtually no impact on project feasibility. In fact, what we find and what we found in this work is that there's a negative relationship between density and project feasibility. And the reason for that is because project costs are really high and they're not offset by our revenues that we're getting from the increased density. So every floor and every story that we're adding, whether it's rental or condominium, we're actually adding more costs than we are in revenue, right? Which is why most of the projects that we're seeing, the very few of them that actually are advancing at smaller densities. We're seeing that 6 to 12 story project being, kind of the Goldilocks scenario in terms of feasibility that are currently working. And in fact, it gets better as we go lower density. Currently there were 900 new home sales last month after virtually zero for the previous year. They were all townhome product, right? All stacked townhome product. This is a GTA number. So that's the primary issue that we're currently seeing in the current market. Again, not where we think we're headed, not where we might be in 2 or 3 years from now. So, putting these entitlements in place, it still does add a tremendous amount of value. You're de-risking the process, you're shortening development timelines for the time when the market is actually supportive of those types of densities. Once we get there, it's really, your crystal ball is as good as mine. There's a lot of different perspectives of where we're going. If we end up where we were in 2020 and 2021, as much density as you can layer onto these properties, the better. The more value we're creating and the more ability for these groups to offer community benefits, whether that's affordable housing or non-residential space or community space. But if we're going back to, where we think we were probably in the early 2010s, which is where, most market analysts think we're going, I don't think we're going to have the same level of investor activity. We don't think we're going to be creating such value where buildings, condo projects are selling out in a weekend, right? As opposed to 2 years, is just what they used to. In which case, those 15 to 25 story buildings are probably going to be much more valuable, and the higher density stuff is going to continue to be a bit of a slog and a challenge.
Is there anything we could be doing to help create a more hospitable environment to get shovels in the ground faster and get these projects to fruition?
Personally, I think EJEX is actually on a very strong trajectory in doing a lot of these things. Listening in this morning on the changes that you're making to your comprehensive zoning bylaw, the process that resulted in the secondary plan area itself, where we're putting a lot of these entitlements in place, and the strategic directions to quickly rezone and approve some of these projects that have come forward. Like, these are all very positive, and I think it sends the right message to developers. But also putting these types of entitlements in place, it's going to set you up over the long term. And again, I think you're doing a lot of the things that are in your control to do outside of offering direct financial incentive and subsidy to really start kickstarting things. But that is, of course, a municipal finance consideration, and that's a
yeah.
Totally
But let's not
different.
go there. I didn't ask you about that. But I thank you. I thank you for your candor and your bluntness. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time here today.
Any other questions for the consultant? Seeing none, then we're going to go up to report PDS-2026-15, Town of Ajax Inclusionary Zoning Assessment Report and Draft Official Plan Amendment and Zoning Bylaw Amendment. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please, to put it on the floor? I see Councillor Bauer and Councillor Henry as the mover and seconder. The recommendations are that the report titled Town of Ajax Inclusionary Zoning Assessment Report and Draft Official Plan Amendment and Zoning Bylaw Amendment be received for information. And 2, that council endorse option 1 to proceed with an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment to implement an inclusion zoning policy framework with an additional set-aside fee of 0% of total residential units to be required as inclusionary units to be reevaluated as market conditions improve. Any questions, comments, concerns regarding the report? I have a comment. It's funny. As the mayor's directives were going through, I'm sure myself and many of you also had concerns regarding, whether this was actually best for the public and for inclusionary zoning, the subsidized units. And it looks like, Mayor Collier, who is not there right now, so will not hear these words of praise, was actually pretty forward thinking in including these in the mayor's directives, because as we are seeing now, we are left with 0 if we had not approved them. So since he's not here, let's pretend I didn't say that out loud. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Vote. Just waiting for Mayor Collier, who's currently not at is absent. We'll just give him the full 10 seconds. Okay, well, that passes with the councilors that were present. Thank you, council. Okay, we're making great time. Actually, just show of hands. Anybody need a 5-minute break? Okay, we're just going to call a quick 5-minute recess then, and everyone will be back by, we'll call it 2:42. Thank you. And we will call this meeting back to order. Everyone seems to be back. All right, where we left off was 5.2 PDS-2026-16. I love reading these out loud, apparently. Our Future in Focus, Commercial Land Needs Strategy Background Report, Employment Areas Strategy Background Report, and Climate Resilience and Green Lands System Policy Review Report. I believe this is Mr. McCullough again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we're pleased today to release the next 3 reports as part of our official plan review. So as you may recall, we released the first 2 reports last month, and then we're joined today with our consultants from SGL, Hempson Consulting, and Tate Research. Hempson and Tate will be giving the presentation today. I would, if it's okay, ask for a bit of leniency on the presentation. We have 2 presentations today on this topic, one with the consultants and one with internal staff. The consultants' presentation is about 15 minutes long. However, we will make up the time as our internal staff presentation is approximately 5 minutes. So we would hope that the committee would agree to a little bit of leniency on that item.
Well, it's a good thing I'm chairing today because I will give you that leniency. Go ahead, Mr. McCullough.
I appreciate that. And finally, just before we get into the presentation, I will mention that we are planning a series of open houses over the summer, and all that information will be communicated through our IMO page and through social media. So be sure to watch. We are planning the first one at the end of June, so we're looking forward to seeing the community out with that. And with that, I will turn it over to Stefan, who will start us off with the consultant presentation. Thank you very much.
Hope you can hear me.
We can hear you. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen here. That doesn't seem to be coming through, Mr. Chairman, yet.
Okay, give us a quick second. We see it on our screen. No, we don't. No, we don't want to see it on our screen. Sorry, we see the previous presentation. Our clerk's going to walk you through how to make sure to share this properly. One moment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hi there. Could you just hit the share screen button in the top left corner?
Yep.
And then you should be prompted to select the window that you'd like to share today.
Okay. And that seems to be selecting.
We're just seeing a black screen. Did you select the PowerPoint or PDF that you were hoping to share today?
I did. Let me try that once more.
Perfect.
Let's try this.
There we go.
Ah, excellent.
You just want to put it to full screen. We'll make sure that works.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Clerk, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, we're still seeing the version with all of the slides. I don't know if you went to full screen on another window.
Well, let's try.
If it's on another window, we just need you to select that window now.
Yeah, okay. Is that not coming up?
No, so you've selected the window that we're currently seeing. So if you go back to share screen, you can select the appropriate window that you'd like to share.
Okay. Is that coming up now?
No, we're still seeing the other version, so we can share your slides for you. Just give us one moment.
Okay.
Okay, there's your slides. If you could just let us know when to advance.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Clerk, and my apologies, Mr. Chairman. This presentation covers the second part of Hemson's retainer with SGL for the official plan update, Mr. Chairman, and it's focused on planning for employment areas. And then Samir, my colleague, is going to pick things up to speak about the commercial land need side of things. So we have a report, an employment area strategy report out, and in that report, there's a lot of discussion about the policy framework under which these employment areas are planned for which there's been a lot of change over the last few years. There's a more detailed discussion about the employment forecasts for these areas, which was touched on a little bit in my presentation to this committee last month. There's a section on the market conditions, regional and local market conditions that sort of are governing employment areas. And the bottom line here is that they're pretty good right now, unlike what you heard from Mr. Michael on the residential side of the ledger. There's very detailed profiles about your existing employment areas, and ultimately there's a pretty strong conclusion coming out of our report that the town should prioritize the protection of your remaining employment areas. Next slide, please. Can we advance to the next slide, Madam Clerk? Oh, thank you. Oops, just that's the one. Yeah, thank you. So just what this slide does is it just looks at the employment base as a whole in Ajax. And you can see on the graph on the left there, over the past 2 decades, the town has experienced pretty steady employment growth. It's about 18,000 jobs between the 2001 and the 2021 censuses. And there's 2 messages I wanted to just impart here to the committee. The first is that most of the job growth has been in the sort of the green components of the bar. So those are jobs that have a fixed location within the town. But there's also been quite a lot of job growth in the red component of the bar, and those are jobs that are like construction or transportation focused that have no fixed location. And a lot of what they're doing is dealing with the movement of goods in and around your employment areas. The gold component of the bar is the jobs that are located in people's residences, and they've been pretty static at 10%, other than in the COVID period in 2021, where you can see there was a huge shift from people working in their regular offices to their homes. So that's ignore whatever's happening in 2021 here, because that's an anomaly. The second thing I want to point out is that although the job growth has been quite sustained, it has not kept pace with the population growth. And you'll remember from my presentation last month that one of the key objectives that we're trying to achieve through the official plan update is to build a complete community. And that's a community where people can work close to where they live without extended commutes. And so a fairly crude measure of completeness is the ratio of jobs to people. And that graph there on the right shows you the activity rate, which is a sort of expression of that ratio. Ajax's activity rate has actually declined fairly steadily over the last 20 years, and it's lower than the average activity rate in Durham. In fact, only Clarington has a lower activity rate than Ajax in Durham. And I should point out that Clarington is opening up huge swaths of employment areas at the moment. Next slide, please. The distribution of jobs within the town is actually is quite diverse. So this chart here shows you in red the distribution of the jobs that are in the town, and then in gold you have the distribution of the jobs in the region. And so in 2016, which is sort of the last reliable census data we have on this, about 60% of all the jobs in Ajax was concentrated in 5 sectors: retail trade, manufacturing, healthcare and social assistance, education, and accommodation and food services. So that's, as I said, quite a good balance between service-oriented businesses and goods-producing businesses. 3 things to note here. First is that relative to Durham as a whole, Ajax exhibits quite a strong industrial profile. So there's a heavy concentration of the region's manufacturing, transportation and warehousing, and wholesale trade jobs that are in the town. Second, much of that activity requires employment areas for its activities. And second of all, this is way back in 2016, and there's a lot happened, particularly in the last 5 years in Ajax, that I want to speak to a little bit in the coming slides. Next slide, please. The other thing that I'm sure you're all aware of course, is that Ajax remains an out-commuting municipality as a whole. So a large number of Ajax residents travel outside the town for work, particularly in the knowledge-based and professional services sector, where there's a heavy concentration of people sort of going to a job in a downtown location in Toronto, for example. But there are a number of sectors where there's a lot of in-commuting as well that kind of offsets the out-commuting. And so the green in this chart shows the out-commuters for each of the sectors, and the gold shows the in-commuters. And when you look at manufacturing and retail trade, those two, and transportation and warehousing, all the activities that are located on employment lands actually attract a lot of commuters in from other places, as well as having a lot of people leave to jobs in these areas, in these sectors elsewhere. Next slide, please. I mentioned we've had a lot of employment growth in Ajax in the last 5 years since the 2021 census, especially on employment lands. And this map here shows you in purple your currently designated employment areas, and the yellow dots that are sprinkled around them shows you the buildings that are under construction or have been recently constructed or are proposed to be constructed in the near term. And the bottom line is that you've had over 4 million square feet of building space constructed since 2016, around 3,500 jobs associated with those with that development. And there's another 1.7 million square feet of buildings that we know is going to take place in the next few years. So it's a really strong market right now, and Ajax is of course very well positioned to continue to capitalize on that market. Next slide, please. Another thing I want to point out is that because we are in some respects through this exercise updating work that the region did as part of its Envision Durham exercise, we've spent a lot of time trying to understand how the recent employment growth that's occurred in the town fits into the Envision Durham forecasts. So the bottom line is, from an employment area perspective, we still think we will still get to the same place as Envision Durham envisioned. But a lot of the growth that's been forecast for the employment areas has been front-ended. And if you look at the graph there on the right, or the chart there on the right, you can see that our forecasts reflect all the recent growth that's occurred on employment areas, and then sort of incrementally fills in the remaining employment areas to 2051, whereas the Envision Durham forecasts had a little bit more even employment growth over the period. Ultimately, both of these two forecasts get to the same place, but maximize the potential on the remaining land supply that exists in the town. Next slide, please. So this chart here, you'll see just a summary of the overall employment forecast. If we can go to the next slide, Madam Chair, Madam Clerk. Thank you. Oh, the next one, page 6. Can we get to page 6, Madam Clerk?
Sorry, you can continue. It just looks like there's a little bit of a delay between the video.
Okay, sure. So what you'll see on page 6 then, Mr. Chairman, is just a summary of the employment forecast that I've been describing. And you'll see a forecast that is very much front-loaded and then sort of incrementally builds up to 2051. The key thing I wanted to emphasize with this is that the employment projection remains quite ambitious. The ratio of jobs to people that I highlighted earlier is set to increase. And you can see the gold component of the bar here represents the job growth that is anticipated on the employment areas. So reflecting what's just occurred between 2021 and 2026, which is unusually high amount of job growth. And then we sort of know what's going to happen in the next 5 years, and then incrementally filling in the remaining employment areas to 2051. Samir will speak about the jobs associated with the red component of the bar, and then the green component of the bar is the major office jobs that are anticipated as part of the forecast. The next slide, please. So wanted to conclude then just with to highlight that the biggest constraint on your employment land jobs will be the land supply itself, and the forecast indeed is set to maximize the opportunities that exist on your remaining employment areas. So it's about 3,000 more jobs between now and 2051 that we feel could fit onto the remaining vacant lands in your employment areas, with a little bit of intensification in your existing employment areas. And the map that you see up there, it's a little fuzzy on my screen, but I can just make out the blue areas are the areas where you which are currently occupied with businesses, and then the red areas are the vacant lands that are remaining to be populated. So about 3,000 jobs that we could reasonably shoehorn into the remaining lands to 2051, and that's what this strategy is doing. And then if we go to the final slide, which would be slide 9, I just wanted to conclude by re-emphasizing that the report has very detailed profiles of the current employment areas in the town. And when we look at each area and the strengths and weaknesses of each area, we really conclude that there are very good reasons to protect those remaining lands. They are a key strategic asset, and that's clearly demonstrated with the growth that we've seen in the last few years and the proposals that we know are on the books. We don't necessarily want a situation where all the employment areas, elsewhere in the region and all the residential development occurs in the town. A lot of the businesses that are in Ajax serve a local function. They've got long historic ties to the community, and we want to build that kind of complete community. And although we haven't done any financial analysis as part of our report, generally speaking, there are really good fiscal benefits that would accrue by having employment areas. They tend to produce higher tax revenues than they demand on municipal services. So there are conversion opportunities that we've highlighted in the report. Some of these are south of Bailey Street on the Ajax East employment areas. But they're few and far between, and there's also an area that, at the Salem and Highway 401 intersection south of the highway where there may be opportunities. But if you are going to consider future conversions, they should be done on a very site-specific basis. They should address compatibility issues, the long-term employment potential of those lands, and you should have very strict criteria and apply that criteria when considering future conversions. And we anticipate developing those criteria as part of the next phase of the OP review. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I think I'm going to pass things over to Samir now.
Go ahead, Samir.
I'm not given an option to share the right screen. Right now I'm sharing myself, it looks like.
Go ahead, Clark.
Hi, Samir. Top left-hand corner.
Yeah.
Looks like you've selected that. So now it should ask you which window you'd like to share. Are you seeing the pop-up to select which window?
It's just waiting to load. I'm going to just redo it. There we go.
There we go. We can see the presentation. Perfect.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of council. My name is Samir Patel, and I'm a vice president with Tate Economic Research. Tate Research was retained to conduct a commercial land need strategy for the town of Ajax. The report submitted to town staff presents detailed forecasts of commercial demand to 2051. It includes trends impacting future commercial, a detailed inventory of current and future supply, and a demand forecast. This presentation provides a brief summary of the analysis and resulting recommendations. There are many factors within the macro commercial environment that influence the requirement for future commercial space. These include demographics, changing formats, consumer and retailer preferences. This slide summarizes two of the more impactful ones with respect to Ajax's future commercial environment. The first is e-commerce. The overwhelming majority of purchases are still made at brick and mortar stores. However, almost every retail category has some form of e-commerce. The implications within the Ajax context is twofold. Firstly, brick and mortar stores increasingly have to provide an experience that cannot be found online. Therefore, where and how retail is planned and delivered takes on greater importance. The second part is larger national chains, many of which anchor and tenant commercial developments, are finding they can serve greater areas with fewer stores. The other big trend is mixed use. Mixed use developments will increasingly be the vehicle through which new commercial space in Ajax is delivered. There are several challenges with commercial and mixed use buildings, including the reluctance on behalf of larger national chains to tenant space within these types of formats, conflicts in uses and parking. In addition, the major issue is the overall land economics, in which mixed-use performers favor residential development over commercial. Essentially, the commercial land need strategy is a supply and demand analysis. On the supply side, there are two components: existing supply and future supply. This slide illustrates the commercial categories that were inventoried and form the basis of the analysis. Commercial consists of three categories: food and beverage commercial, or FBC, non-food and beverage commercial, or NFBC, and service space. Typically, FBC and NFBC are what we refer to as retail. The existing inventory provides us with information on the current health of the market, as well as assists us in the demand analysis when setting inflow and capture rates. We split the commercial inventory between employment lands and non-employment lands. The result is that Ajax has approximately 4.4 million square feet of occupied commercial space, of which around 20% is located within the employment lands. The vacancy rate in Ajax, excluding employment lands, is approximately 4.4%. Typical vacancy rates are between 5 and 7.5%. Therefore, the low vacancy rate in Ajax could be an indication of undersupply of commercial space. Overall in Ajax, FBC and NFBC, or what we consider as retail, accounts for approximately 52% of the total space. Typically, we'd like to see a 60-40 split between retail and service. Therefore, the lower ratio in Ajax is likely due to the fact that there's not an enclosed mall or a large main street. The implication is that Ajax loses expenditure dollars to other municipalities that likely have a more fulsome range of retail types. Within the employment land, service is a dominant use, which is what we expect. This slide examines the square feet per capita of commercial space in Ajax compared to other municipalities where we have completed municipal-wide inventories and are confident in the comparison. The upshot is Ajax is underserved to other areas except for Milton. To summarize on the current health of the market, Ajax has a range of goods and services in various nodes across the town. However, there are a number of indicators, including the vacancy rate and per capita ratio, which suggests that Ajax is understored with respect to the amount of commercial space. The ability to accommodate future demand is primarily based on the future supply, which is shown here. Overall, there's a significant amount of commercial supply that could potentially accommodate future demand. There are three components of supply. Combined, there's approximately 1.8 million square feet of potential commercial space that could be added into the market through development applications, pre-consultation applications, and vacant land. On the opposite side of supply is demand. Market demand for commercial space is influenced by population growth. The findings within these commercial land needs strategy are underpinned by the Ajax population forecast of 199,100 persons by 2051, or a growth of 58,000 persons. The result of the current and future population, as well as other inputs and adjustments, is that by 2051, Ajax residents will spend approximately $2 billion annually on commercial goods and services in Ajax and other municipalities. This represents an increase of approximately $521 million annually over the current levels. We then take the demand for commercial space and reconcile that against the potential future supply. Generally speaking, there's demand for 1.2 million square feet of commercial space by 2051, and there's the potential commercial supply of 1.8 million square feet as described in the previous slides. Therefore, it can be concluded that no new additional commercial lands are required to support future demand. The previous supply and demand analysis focused on an Ajax-wide analysis. However, in practice, demand will be geographically distributed as well as supply. This slide indicates that while overall there's a balance of supply and demand, in areas such as the GO Station PMTSA, which is expected to have significant population growth, there's currently an undersupply of commercial space. However, this is expected as given the mixed-use development type of format, that commercial space will come online with the population. To recap, the analysis results point to the fact that no new commercial lands are required to support future demand. So while this is a positive outcome, the town cannot take it for granted that all potential commercial will be built. Our experience across the province is that there are more applications to reduce the amount of required commercial than to provide an appropriate amount of commercial. This is based on a number of factors, the leading one being land economics and mixed-use performance, which favor residential over commercial. Therefore, our policy recommendations are biased towards protecting and encouraging more commercial space. We have provided 4 policy suggestions, all of which are centered around encouraging commercial and ensuring that there's a mechanism to ensure development applications that result in a reduction in the amount of commercial are properly assessed. That ends my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions, I believe, along with Stefan.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so we have questions from committee. We'll start with Mayor Collier.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentations. I do have a few questions. I'll start with, how can you reliably predict out to 2051 with any sort of accuracy? I mean, we undergo this process every few years. I don't know if you had an opportunity to review the Watson and Associates reports, 2010 and 2019, analyzing our employment lands. But I'm just wondering how you can do this.
Through the chair to the mayor, I believe for the employment, if you're speaking about employment lands, I can ask Stefan, or if on the commercial side or the retail side, you're correct. We can't predict out to 2051, which is why we periodically review the findings. Tate Research actually conducted the 2018 retail study, and it's really based on population forecasts. So if we achieve those population forecasts, we'll be on track. If not, then the amount of commercial space will be reduced.
Okay, you talk about a 60-40 split, and I think we would all like to see that. But in reality, development is market driven. So what can this council do? We've tried very hard. We all want to see an 80-20 commercial to residential split on the tax base, but the numbers keep going higher and higher and higher in residential despite our efforts. How can we steer that ratio from our perspective?
Through the chair to the mayor, I don't think there's anything wrong with having a reduced ratio. Typically, that aligns with current trends where it's really service space that is driving the tenanting. Health and wellness, restaurants, personal services are really what's driving tenanting right now. Not even the concern. The 60-40, all that means is that there's less outflow of expenditures, and that may not be sustainable in the sense that, as we saw with Stefan's slides, where there's an outflow of labor. So when people go to Toronto to work, they may end up doing some of their shopping there too. So the 60-40 is just aspirational in terms of it results in more dollars being saved within Ajax than going out of Ajax. The flip side of that is that there are restaurants that people come in that are high profile, that are on Instagram, that people want to eat at in Ajax, where people come in from the surrounding municipalities and spend their dollars within Ajax as well.
Okay. You talk about on slide 5, 1.8 million square feet that could be added to our inventory. Where is this and how? These are lands that aren't already identified in our OP?
Through the chair. There's 3 areas for the 1.8. One is, so around 800,000 of that is just current development applications that are within the pipeline. An additional 214,000 are pre-consultation applications that haven't been officially submitted. And then there's another 755, which are commercially designated lands that could accommodate future commercial. I will flag that that's 755 of vacant commercial lands is a very similar number to what we had in 2018. Therefore, the uptake of that land hasn't occurred. So those lands may not be attractive for commercial for various reasons, or they're just waiting to be developed. So that's the how the 1.8 breaks down.
I can't agree with you on that statement. Since 2018 to 2022, we had about $1 billion worth of commercial investment in the town of Ajax. So how is it possible that the needle didn't move on the land availability? Like things like the Amazon warehouse, for instance, 1 million square feet. The Pure Industrial warehouse, 1.2 million square feet. A combination of others through Crestpoint and everything else is another 1-point-something million square feet. How can we say, or how can you say that the needle hasn't moved on available land when we've had that type of that quantity of development?
Through the chair, so our report, the Tate report, only deals with retail commercial lands, and therefore, so the Amazon, so those are all employment lands development.
Okay.
And
so would that be?
Yeah, that would be
Stefan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, through the chair, I think Stefan's presentation recognized, I think it's been 4.2 million square feet on that site that's been constructed since approximately 2016.
Okay. Okay. I'll try and stick to the retail. One of your statements you made was the undersupply in the Go. I assume you reviewed as part of this process the 10 or so mayor's directives and approvals that we've given, as well as the secondary plan that's ongoing right now in the MTSA area, and the direction being given, that all of those will have some type of mixed use component versus what was originally there, where they were going to be predominantly residential without that mixed use component. Did you review those, and have you factored those stats in?
Through the chair, we haven't, in terms of, unless they were active development applications, but I think what the slide wanted to show was that as those populations, because it's mixed use, as those populations come in, the assumption is that on the ground floor or the ground and second floor, you'd have to provide a level of commercial, which would then mirror the population growth. My last slide wanted to highlight the fact that across the province, we find that many developers try to reduce the amount of commercial they can build, and therefore, in terms of the policy recommendations, we wanted to ensure that if somebody comes in with a mixed-use development application and says, you know, the ground floor isn't viable or it doesn't work, that we have the mechanism to say, well, you have to actually show us or show Ajax why you think it's not viable. So in terms of not forcing them, but making sure that the ground floor is always viewed as commercial development.
Well, this is why I really like mayor's directives and doing things this way, because we can hardwire these requirements in the zoning bylaw, you know, to absolutely make sure that in the podiums they have a grocery store, daycare, coffee shops, restaurants, all those amenities that the people that are going to live in those units are going to need, and they don't have to jump in their car to go to. So I'm a bit surprised that since we've done that, probably, I don't know, 6,000 units in the MTSA, maybe more. No, actually, no. Now that I think of it, probably about 12,000 units in the MTSA, that you wouldn't have factored those into these results.
So through the chair, if I can just jump in quickly. So there was many of those applications were considered in the development pipeline. We also included other ones like the minister's zoning orders that have been approved over the last number of years. I think there was a cutoff date though, and I'd have to go back into the report to see, because I know a lot of those strong mayors applications have been moving pretty quickly, and so in order to allow our consultants to complete a lot of their work, there was a cutoff date earlier this year where we made sure that we had to stop adding them to make sure that a lot of the information was accurate in the final report.
Okay, just I guess I use the term doom and gloom. I mean, when I hear some of these things like undersupply and back to Stefan with the preserve the employment lands, I think it's important that we note, especially for the public, that we've made a lot of changes here, this council has, that are pretty progressive to maintain these employment numbers, and not only maintain, but improve, increase. So what was our official plan, Sean, before? 32 jobs per net hectare on average for employment?
Yeah, I believe it was approximately around there for our last analysis. I think that was in Vision Durham as well.
I don't think we've done anything less than 50. So in most cases, when we do these, they are significantly, like 500 to 600% higher than what the standard would have been, which is actually growing the number of jobs and opportunities in these areas. Anyway, I have some questions, I guess. Those are my jobs on the retail. Just on to, I guess, Stefan, the other, is he still here?
He's here. One moment. Go ahead.
Just very similar. You talk about protecting the employment areas, and as I referenced, the 2010 and the 2018 or 2019 Watson reports, you know, that talked about our inventory of employment land. The 2010 said we didn't have enough. The 2019 said we did have enough. Yours talked about protecting. I guess same question. Your numbers show that more people are working from home from a significant amount, like it's gone up a lot. However, we have done some conversions in the employment lands, but I guess same question as to the other consultant, we have increased significantly the number of jobs per net hectare, plus adding, 25 stories of residential above. Were those numbers factored into your figures?
Stefan, once I select you, don't touch anything, and you can speak right now. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Red is
Through
good.
you, sorry. Through you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we spent probably the biggest chunk of our time was to try and assess exactly what has occurred over the last 5 or 6 years since the Envision Durham forecast was prepared, because a lot has occurred. As you mentioned, Amazon was built in 2021 with a very high employment density. I should say Amazon is quite an unusual kind of business, especially with respect to the density of employment. So there's been a lot of other stuff constructed as well. The Lake Ridge facility, I think, was another one you mentioned. The density on that is almost certainly going to be a lot lower than what's in Amazon. So we've tried to map out. We've looked very closely at the density trends. We've looked very closely at what's been built on the ground, and we have a pretty good idea, I think, of what's likely to occur over the next 5 to 7 years. And as you point out, and I agree with Samir, the further you go out to 2051, the harder it becomes to forecast this kind of stuff. And with the employment lands, it's particularly difficult because it depends so much on regional and provincial and global forces and supply chains. So, but we have done a lot of work to reset things and to update assumptions to reflect what's actually happening on the ground.
Okay. You talked about manufacturing, and I mean, that would be great, and I would love to have more of that type, but unfortunately these are market driven, and we went through a pretty significant growth in warehousing, especially through COVID, and you talked a bit of e-commerce. I'm trying to think of how to phrase this question. I mean, how do you get around the market driven? Like, you get what you get.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, you get what you get. I couldn't agree more. And the market has certainly shifted. We're no longer in the age where employment lands are places where we do sort of heavy, dirty industrial manufacturing type stuff. As you rightly say, a lot of the boom in employment areas that has occurred since COVID has got to do with logistics, transportation, warehousing, distribution, which has relatively low densities, but still needs dedicated areas for its activities. And Lake Ridge is a prime example of that. So I think we've recognized that in the market, and we still think there's a need for employment areas to accommodate that kind of stuff, particularly in the near future. So I couldn't agree with you more. But there's not much you can do to change what somebody wants to do on those employment areas when they develop there.
Okay. Just, I guess I'll ask your opinion on this, because I've looked at this on, basically with the opinion that, a single story commercial plaza or a single story employment, condo unit with 7 or 8 different buildings will generate DCs, planning fees, and taxes once for one level, versus by maintaining those employment numbers, or in our case, growing those employment numbers, but then adding the residential component above, provides us exponential more planning fees, development charges, and taxes, in addition to giving close proximity to employment so people can walk to work. I mean, looking at those types of benefits, what are your thoughts on that? Because I understand you're probably just looking at the employment zone strictly for employment, but not for the other uses, which what we have done here as a council in certain areas.
Yeah, so there's several things going on there, Mr. Chairman. The first is that I entirely agree with the mayor that there's a real opportunity to be had to develop mixed-use developments. And I think Samir touched on this as well. And those have financial benefits as well as sort of planning community benefits as well. Not all, a lot of that will be geared towards retail kind of uses. And the Hempson study, our sort of study, really focuses on less on those kinds of uses and more on the uses that need to be segregated from other types of uses. Either because they're heavy industry or because they generate a lot of truck traffic and they have, you know, very powerful lights that need to accommodate turning circles of trucks when it's 8 o'clock at night in January, or because there's odor or vibration or air quality issues, or all that kind of stuff. And, you know, it's not just manufacturing that generates those kinds of compatibility issues. Anywhere you're going to get high volume of trucks and goods being moved, you're going to have those sorts of issues. So I think mixed use is an important element to explore, and it's great that the town has put the right mechanisms into place to foster it. But there still will be important parts of your local economic base that require lands that are, you know, clearly separated from other types of uses.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Next, we have Regional Councillor Crawford.
Thank you. I think what I'm hearing you say is that we should not be converting our very precious commercial or employment land into housing. Am I hearing that correctly?
Certainly on the employment areas, that's what you're hearing from me. And I think Samir may want to touch, I'll leave the commercial retail areas to Samir.
Through you, Mr. Chair. What I'm saying is that if a strip plaza, for instance, were to be redeveloped or have a development application for a mixed-use plaza, mixed-use development, typically the resulting amount of commercial is less than what was already existing in the strip plaza. And so what we're saying is that at a minimum, you should, where possible, replace the existing space, not the existing tenants, but the existing amount of space. Because while we view intensification and mixed use as great, more often than not, we end up losing commercial space when those development applications go through. So it's just to make sure that it's not we don't have a net loss of commercial space.
Well, what's your thoughts on building on top of commercial?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in terms of building on top of existing commercial or
or even future commercial? I guess it would depend on what it was, right?
I think in terms of building on top of existing, there's whole, like, I'm sure there's engineering, those types of issues that, and in terms of just general mixed use of having residential above commercial, it works in very specific instances, unlike a typical commercial strip plaza where you can drive up, park in front of the store, walk into the store. There is a cultural barrier in terms of people not wanting to, for instance, drive underground into a parking spot and then have to take some sort of escalator to start shopping. And then there is pushback from major national chains where they're sort of, if you're a Shoppers Drug Mart, for instance, or you have a very specific floor plan that you have to operate from, and those chains find it difficult to accommodate those into mixed use formats. But in the scenario where that's the only option, they'll adjust and they'll do it.
Okay, just question. Is this where I can ask where you got your data?
Yes.
Okay, this is okay, good. Okay, so I thought the data collecting was a bit odd. I didn't know actually that that my phone. I mean, I knew my phone could be tracked, but I didn't realize anybody actually used any of that stuff. So I realized it was a short window that you used it. Well, it was a year you used it for. And what surprised me, to be honest with you, is that the Harwood Plaza trade area was higher percentage than Costco. Now, are we only counting bodies? Are we counting, like, how can you must only be counting bodies, because you can't tell really if people are shopping or spending money, right? So it's just volume of people. Is that what we're tracking here? Can you explain that for me?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I think there's two things. First of all, as a research firm, we find the data really interesting, but we also recognize that whenever we go speak in public, people also say, wait a second, this is really weird and creepy. And so I think just to sort of, there's two things on that side. One is that how you get tracked is up to you in terms of your location enabled on apps, etc. So it's if you don't want to be tracked, you just turn it off. Secondly, from our point of view, it's anonymized data, so we have a sense of where it's coming from, but typically it's also restricted to a geography that's not specific to like where your house is, and we wouldn't know anything beyond just the location. So it's fully anonymized. As for what is collected, it's correct. It's just whether you were seen at that location versus how much you spent. So you're right. So you could, if you went to Costco once a month and spent $400 versus if you went every week and spent only about a hot dog or $2, the person who went every week would be captured more often than the person who went once a month. So we don't have the ability to see how many dollars are spent. So we use it we don't use it linearly in terms, we don't interpret the results straight. Like we look at it, it's one extra data point that just helps us in understanding where the customer draw is.
So that's interesting, because everything we've heard about the plaza or Ajax Plaza is that business is down. So we're tracking I'm just trying to understand the difference between, like, there's quite a big difference between the percentages between a plaza that seems to have less traffic going to it versus a center that like a Costco center where you would see volumes of people every single day. So I'm not sure if does that make sense to me? Does that make sense to you? Like, I don't, is it just the bodies in the plaza area? That's it. So we have lots of bodies in the area, not necessarily lots of business in the area.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. So all we try to do with the mobility data is to understand what is your width of draw. So how far do people come from? And then we'd say if 75%, for instance, come from within 3 kilometers, then we'd be able to say, well, that 3 kilometers is your market area, and what's the population within that. So it's not the actual amount of data points at Harwood Center. It actually tells us how big the draw is. So at Costco, the draw is very large. It draws from a larger area. There's more population within that area. And then we'd be able to sort of say, this is the market for that Costco. It's much larger than for the market for a smaller area.
Which would be your next under the all other, would be where you're drawing from.
Yeah. No, I'm just sorry. I'm just going to move to that table.
I'm on page 612.
Correct. So through you, Mr. Figure B1, is that?
Yeah.
So the way to interpret Figure B1 would be, so for Harwood Plaza, 61% of the people who had visited Harwood Plaza, of the people who had allowed tracking on their phones, etc. So of those people we were able to identify, 61% of those people came or lived within Ajax, which makes sense because it's more local. Versus if you look at the Costco, 37% of the people who visited that Costco lived in Ajax. The balance of the people who are seen at that Costco lived either in Pickering, 18% came from Pickering, 15% came from Toronto, which also makes sense because it's a larger draw.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Most of my questions have been asked and answered. I do want to circle back to the employment land. So to Samir, I'm the counselor for Ward 2, so up in the north area. And when we were looking at some of the employment land tables on page 7 and 4 of the presentation, and we're seeing all the purple and pink highlighted there. And then again for the Costco area, that's also myself. Sorry, I think a headphone just died there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, sorry. So looking at those areas, let's start with the Main Street on Highway 2, the Costco area, Michael's, all of that area. So we, Regional Council had already spoke with regards to having residential on top of it. And I know that's problematic. I know that's not the way we like to introduce residential is on top of an existing building, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if I've seen it in terms of adding residential on top of a sort of like, if you're in a power center, adding on top of existing. I've seen it, the building gets demolished and then a mixed use development is constructed with commercial on the ground floor.
Which makes sense, yeah, because it's all new, it's all fresh. And your concern is keeping the square footage of commercial that was already there in the new foot plan in the base of the building with the residential on top, not shrinking that commercial size foot plan to accommodate for residential. That was your main concern in that scenario, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair. More so ensuring the function remains. And I'll give you a great example in that, for instance, if there's a no frills supermarket, a current no frills would be around maybe 35,000 square feet. And that means that plaza has a neighborhood supermarket function. Now we've seen no frills being developed at 10,000 square feet, and they're just as good, they have just as amount of stuff in them. So if they said we'll replace the no frills at 10,000, I would be fine with it because it still has the supermarket function. And in that area, we get into difficulty if we talk specifically about retaining that 35,000 square feet that was existing for a supermarket, because they're providing the same function. It's just a smaller store.
You want the development to maintain the same neighborhood function and cater to the existing neighborhood it was already doing so, while adding to the new neighborhood that's created above it in airspace.
Correct.
That's the goal.
Correct.
Okay. So what if you had a space like the Recan Center where there's a lot of empty parking space in certain areas that's not used? What if you created a building inside that existing domain, not on top of something else where it's more difficult, but within the existing structure of the plaza, within the existing footprint of the plaza itself, in an area that's underutilized and not used for parking? What's that look like?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we are in favor of it. It adds mixed use buildings onto underutilized lands. It adds more residential into the area that provides more support for retail, for the existing retail. So it's not demolishing or taking away from anything that's already there. It's just underutilized land. So we see a lot of parking lots being redeveloped into mixed use buildings. And for us, it's a positive. It adds more housing and more support.
It's a win-win.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And then we have some lands that are existing to big places like our Home Depot, our Walmart Plaza, such that we're in the employment zone area prestigious employment zone area, but we're abutting up against the commercial. And we've taken, you know, a little chunk of land here and there and allowed for that, I like to call it like a bridge, a cohesive bridge to the more commercial, prestigious employment area, and where we have like a mixed use where we have, you know, space on the bottom level of the podium, and we have the residential on the top, giving that bridge between the two sections more cohesive. That sounds like something you're in favor of, correct?
For you, Mr. Chair. From a commercial standpoint, for us, any additional commercial is a win. And so as long as, I can't speak to the residential attractiveness, but certainly on the commercial ground floor, any additional commercial for us is always warranted or attractive for us.
Okay. And then when we look at some of the slides that you just went through with Councillor Crawford, and we're looking in particular, I'm just trying to pull it up here, the slides that are showing where we've had our business come from surrounding areas. And we, like the Costco in particular and RioCan was very interesting to me, because I did hear you speak about Ajax not having an indoor plaza, something that Pickering has. But I also noticed, like myself, the RioCan Center, the Costco, that area is packed constantly with people shopping there. And like Costco is basically, you know, for getting a parking spot, Game of Thrones, as is Walmart sometimes, right? Like, let's be honest about that. And there's never enough accessibility parking. I don't think we ever will have enough. But when we look at where we have folks coming from that are going into that area, the graph that you're showing on page, what is it, page here? In the report, it's page 616. On your slide, it's page 73. And we're looking at, you know, the amount of folks that are coming from other areas of Pickering and Whitby. I would imagine that is money that's being spent in the community, because, you know, you come over to do your shopping. Well, you're gonna, as you come in from Pickering, you're gonna notice that we have an Old Navy. Pickering doesn't have an Old Navy. You know, you want to do some shopping there, you're going to notice a restaurant that we have that Pickering doesn't. You might want to eat there, and vice versa from Whitby into coming into Costco and that. But there's no way to see those figures in numbers, right? You said there's no numbers showing the amount of funds spent.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have in the not on specific sort of retailer basis, but part of our demand analysis in the background does account for what this is called inflow. And so it does account for inflow of dollars. So when we in our demand analysis talked about I think it was the 2.1 million or the 1.8 million square feet of future demand. So that is not only demand generated by Ajax residents and their growth, but it also accounts for this inflow of expenditures. So that's part of when we looked at this mobility data, and we see that there are people who live in other municipalities and even who come and work in Ajax. They bring their dollars too, whether it's lunchtime dollars, breakfast dollars. On their way home, they may stop at a supermarket within Ajax. So that we do account for what we call inflow dollars.
And then I'm not seeing anything in your report, and I guess it's because it's short-term based one-offs, but we have some large festivals that come into Ajax and are operational, bringing in, you know, we've got one that does 20,000 people it brings in. Things like that. That's going to be generating a lot more that's not captured in this report. Correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We would normally just have that as the inflow number in terms of we know that there's inflow coming in. The traveling public always spends. So there wouldn't, you know, you could probably have a more specific, if you wanted to look at more of like an economic impact of those events, and then what that means to the surrounding area and uplift in expenditures, whether it's a week-long event, but that wouldn't be specifically captured here in terms of what those events mean on the economic development side.
Okay, so wrapping it up, what are we looking at here for increasing our development, getting some things going, continuing to maintain the existing footprints of the businesses we have, not necessarily their current buildings, but the footprint, the structures. Are you offering some advice, some tips here?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the biggest sort of recommendation is this policy, or is a recommendation or suggestion that when development apps come in and say that they don't want to build ground floor commercial, or it's too difficult, or there's no market, that there should be a level of scrutiny in terms of why that is. They are clearly commercial. There are clearly some mixed-use developments that aren't just well located for ground floor commercial, that don't make sense because they may be on a secondary road, etc., and the viability wouldn't be good. But certainly there are other developments that may be better suited for ground floor commercial, and they may not. Those development applications may not be recommending that, and I just think it's a bit more scrutiny on why that is.
And maybe if I can just jump in, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so continue.
So this, the report before you, this is all background information that will be used in the next phase of the project, which is where we really start looking at what those policy recommendations are and really acting on some of the information and the recommendations, including in these reports.
Which makes sense. It makes sense. Like a lot of things that you've said here today. So, looking at that and knowing that commercial has to stay in the forefront of our minds when we're working with any type of development that involves housing on top, we must be fighting for that commercial space on the main level. So thank you. Thank you for your time and your detailed report. And, we're clearly seeing that Ajax is attracting a lot of people from outside of Ajax into our business area. So that was very appreciative to see. Thank you.
Great. Any other speakers who want to speak? Seeing none, allow me to jump to the report. This is PDS 2026-16. The recommend. Oh, can I get a mover and a seconder first, please? Oh, wait, sorry. On the same thing? Mm-hmm. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, folks. Clerks, you're right. As informed me, there's another presentation, 5.2.2. So before mover and seconder, Director, Mr. McCullough, did you want to set the table again?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry about that. So I'll turn it over to Nicolette Francis. She's an environmental planner with the town, and she's written the Climate Resilience and Greenland System Report, and she's got a very quick presentation on that. So I'll turn it over to Nicolette.
Please let me know if you can hear me.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Just going to share my presentation. There's a slight delay on my end here. Please let me know if you can see the slides.
Nicolette, did you want to just start the presentation? We are having some tech issues where it's kind of catching up eventually. We also have the presentations in front of us as well. So just go ahead and start and we'll catch up.
Okay, maybe if I can, all right, I'll kind of do it in this view. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of committee. My name is Nicolette Francis. I work with sustainability the environmental planner in the Planning and Development Services team. I'm here today to provide you with a high-level overview of the Climate Resilience and Greenland System Policy Review as it pertains to the official plan project. This review responds to provincial and regional policy changes as it relates to climate mitigation, adaptation, the natural heritage system, the water resources system, and the agricultural system. Over the past several years, there have been various bills that have been introduced by the province, and most notable of these are listed on this slide, and I will try to get into it with Bill 23 that narrowed the scope of Conservation Authority reviews to natural hazards, and as a result, municipalities are now required to assume an increased role in natural heritage reviews outside of Conservation Authority regulated hazard areas. Bill 5 repealed the Endangered Species Act and enacted the Species Conservation Act and narrowed the definition of habitat. And as a result, less species habitat area may be protected in Ajax compared to previous provincial legislation. Under Bill 17, that really restricted municipalities from imposing building construction and performance standards beyond the Ontario Building Code. And as a result, Ajax now has a reduced authority in imposing building-related measures through its Ajax Green Standard. And just for some context, our Ajax Green Standard is our sustainable design metrics that all development applications are required to meet that undergo site plan and or draft plan of subdivision. Bill 98 proposes to limit municipal authority to regulate building-related environmental standards under site plan control. This bill is still under final legislative approval, but if passed as proposed, the Ajax Green Standard may need to be revised, with building-related measures potentially becoming voluntary and the town relying more on incentives and collaboration with developers to promote sustainable development practices. Then moving on, we conducted a comprehensive gap analysis between Envision Durham, which is the region's official plan, and Ajax's official plan policies. The review essentially identified key thematic areas that are listed on this slide, as well as the next slide. And for the purposes of this presentation, I will just kind of highlight the major components or major themes. So under climate mitigation and adaptation, it highlighted the need to further integrate our climate policies into all land use, infrastructure, transportation, and built form sections of our official plan, and strengthen our policies around green infrastructure, as well as introduce tree canopy targets into the official plan. Under land stewardship and securement, this really highlighted recognizing partnerships with Indigenous communities and their traditional ecological knowledge as it relates to natural heritage, land securement, and stewardship. Under the natural heritage system, this really identified highlighting the Duffins, the Cruthers, and Lynn Creeks as land to lake corridors, and potentially identifying and mapping enhancement opportunity areas that are outside our current natural heritage system. I'm not sure if this slide is showing on your screen, but essentially these areas are highlighted in orange and are identified for restoration opportunities. Then moving on, we have the water resources system. Under the water resources system, we have groundwater protection and source water protection. So groundwater protection really highlighted identifying and mapping water resources such as significant groundwater recharge areas, highly vulnerable aquifers, and significant surface water contribution areas. The town essentially completed a salt vulnerability assessment that maps these features and evaluates them using a salt vulnerability index to identify areas most susceptible to chloride contamination. So this assessment really helped inform where development proposals could potentially be asked for a salt management plan to protect the natural heritage and water resources system. And then under the source water protection, this really highlighted identifying drinking water areas such as intake protection zones 1, 2, and 3. Intake protection zone 1 is a 1 kilometer radius around the drinking water intake in Lake Ontario. Intake protection zone 2 is based on a 2-hour time travel window to intake protection zone 1. And intake protection zone 3 identifies areas where contaminant pathways have been modeled to determine how spills or discharges could travel through tributaries and reach the drinking water intake in Lake Ontario. And then lastly, we looked at the agricultural system. So this really identified and mapping requires the mapping of prime agricultural areas. These areas essentially are high quality farmland with high quality soil that are intended for long-term agricultural use as directed by the province. These areas are highlighted in the black hatched areas on the map to the left of this slide. And lastly, in terms of on-farm diversified use, this was a clarification terminology piece as they're listed as agricultural related secondary uses within our official plan. These uses are secondary land uses on a farm that are complementary to and compatible with agricultural operations, providing additional income while maintaining the farm's primary agricultural function. And then lastly, we did a best management practice research where we looked at other municipalities in terms of what they are adding within their own official plans as well as via programming. And the most notable are listed on this slide. So under tiny forests, that's really looking at the Miyawaki method, which is a dense native tree planting approach that uses closely spaced, fast-growing tree species to rapidly create biodiverse, self-sustaining forests in small urban areas that have limited space. Under pollinator-friendly design, this is something we're already kind of introducing via programs, but this would really look at integrating policy within our official plan for pollinator habitats along infrastructure corridors, looking at maybe some roadway design, utility corridors, as well as public lands. Under ecosystem compensation, this is a last resort tool to address unavoidable development-related ecological impacts on natural features such as woodlands that are outside our current natural heritage system. And finally, solar carports and canopies. This is really the integration of renewable solar energy into large surface parking areas to build municipal leadership and energy resilience. So think of your rooftop solar PV panels, but this would kind of be on top parking areas, and it would kind of essentially provide canopy cover for the urban heat island effect. It would also supplement for EV charging infrastructure and also act as battery storage. Thank you. That is it for me. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Looking at committee right now. Any questions for the presenter? Going once, twice, seeing none. Thank you very much for the presentation. We'll now move on to the motion. I believe I had Regional Councillor Crawford to move. Could I get a seconder, please? I didn't catch the second. Thank you, Councillor Henry. So we're on PDS-2026-16. The recommendation is the report titled Ajax, Our Future in Focus, Commercial Land Needs Strategy Background Report, Employment Area Strategy Background Report, and Climate Resilience and Green Land System Policy Review Report, and associated attachments be received for informations. Any questions, comments, concerns? Regional Councillor Crawford, did you want to speak or just you didn't lower your hand from previously? Okay, I'm going to assume you didn't lower your hand then. Seeing none, we will call the vote. And that passes. See, folks, this is how you get through a 776-page report. The last item on the agenda is adjournment. Can I get a mover and seconder, please? I see Councillor Tyler Morin and Councillor Bauer. Any questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, we'll call the vote. That passes. Everyone have a fantastic day. Great work.